Through the hot red tides of sin.
This is
Faith.
Blind
Counsel.
Everything is within.
You create the light. We are one.
That's it.
Welcome, everyone, to the Faith Blind Counsel podcast. We have a very special episode in today because, unfortunately, Dreadnought was not able to make it for this one. However, we have a sub for him today, which is the fantastic Luxa from the Luxa Cult podcast.
Thank you very much for that generous introduction. I'm stoked to be here.
And as
We're
always,
happy to have you.
we have myself, Frauder Yaramarud, Yara, and
we just missed
you a fucking great
Dreadnought so much.
we miss him so much.
He's here in spirit, really.
Yeah.
And I am Seder Cologne.
All right, so we're getting into a very interesting topic for this episode, which we're going to have to start off with disclaimers.
You know it's going to be good when you have to start out with a disclaimer, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like those fucking warning stickers on, like, CDs and shit, like back in the 80s and 90s. You knew it was going to be a dope-ass album when it had the parental warning sticker.
Oh, hell yeah. That's how you knew. That's how you knew what to buy.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So this episode, we are covering Chemognosis and the use of drugs, entheogens, pharmaceuticals, whatever fucking descriptor you want to give to it. Chemicals that alter your state of consciousness.
Okay, so like seeking a state of altered consciousness by using chemicals?
Yes, essentially. And there are lots of fucking chemicals
Okay.
that do this. Lots of them. So we would like to start off with a disclaimer saying that, like, me personally, I'm not going to condone use of drugs or whatever in your magical practice. You certainly do not need them. But at the same time, I'm also not going to condemn it because it does have such a rich historical practice and is continuing to be used by thousands and thousands of magicians and shamans and whatever around the world. So from me, and honestly, like, the entirety of the Faith Blind Council, like, we're not saying that you need to go do this, but if you do, we're not going to judge you for it.
Yeah, this is for educational purposes.
Yeah, exactly. Like, this is for education, this is for harm reduction, especially, like, if you're going to do it, do your homework on shit. Make sure that you know what you're doing, because, like,
Yeah.
I'm not your dad. I'm not going to look after you. Like, especially in a magical practice. Like,
Frauder Dad isn't here.
Yeah. Frauder Dad is not here. You are your only... Like, you are your own tool. You are your own dad, and you need to do your own shit, because nobody else is going to look out for you on that.
Yeah, this is an academic conversation about, what is this like, and, obviously use common sense and do your homework and look at the laws in your area. We're not telling you to break the law or anything like that, like all of that stuff. So again, an academic, educational conversation for the purpose of harm reduction.
Have we covered all of our bases?
I feel like we have.
I hope so. Okay, now, when it comes to buying 2 kilograms of cocaine,
Right. Make sure you get a test kit before you use your acid.
yes. That's another thing, especially with harm reduction. Fucking, like, if you have something, make sure it's the actual thing. Because, like, in my own shit, like, I've had people who are like, no, this is this great, awesome drug thing. We should totally try it. And then, like, I tried it and I'm like, this is definitely not the drug thing that you described at all. You lied to me, and I want my money back.
Think we've all been there once before. Awkward silence.
So before we started recording, Yara, you were telling us about like some cool like historical shit involving Chemognosis.
So with Chemognosis, it has a very rich usage in a lot of different cultures. Most people nowadays are very much familiar with the like Mesoamerican practice of using either psilocybin mushrooms or ayahuasca. Those are two of the most predominantly known ones, or peyote in the southwestern United States. And those are the ones that most people like associate with chemognosis. But historically, the like Western practices, like when I say Western, I mean primarily like European practices, also have a very rich history involving chemicals and entheogens. One prime example is the oracle at Delphi. So the oracle at Delphi would go into these ecstatic states, and it's assumed now that where the Delphic oracle was, where the temple was built and everything, it was actually built over like a geothermal vent that kind of allowed for these different like these chemical vapors from the earth that would rise up into the area of the Delphic oracle, that she would then inhale these vapors in order to get into some kind of fucked up state in order to prophesy.
Do we have any idea about like what kind of gases these might have been?
De Boer and colleagues found that ethane, methane, and ethylene in spring water near the oracle. So the one that I have heard before was ethylene, was the primary one that was inhaled. Ethylene's also been used as an anesthesia before. So yeah, probably ethylene or some shit like that. Even continuing up into like modern days, there were certain like surrealist artists who would intake different gases in order to reach these like ecstatic states and shit. The one that comes to mind is Rene Dumas, who was a surrealist poet, and he actually got a lot of shit from other surrealists for his practices, and he died pretty young, probably because of these practices. Like I think he died at like in his 30s.
Okay, so maybe his friends were right to give him shit for
Yeah,
it. I don't know.
he was doing it in the 30s, or he died in his 30s, but like he was breathing all of these like extremely toxic gases in order to put him into dreamlike states.
So you're telling me he was huffing glue? Is that what he's
No,
doing?
actually, it was worse than glue. He was huffing carbon tetrachloride.
Ew.
That would be worse than glue, even.
Yeah,
Yeah.
dude.
It's used as like nowadays it's used as like a refrigerant and shit. So like he was basically like cracking open a fridge and huffing what was inside.
Yes, this seems like a really bad idea. Okay, so what about in like places like Rome?
So we have from the stories with like the stories that are still recorded from like people talking about the mythology and shit, like people drinking wine and reaching ecstatic states and shit. Because that's one thing, like you hear ancient Rome and their religious practices. A lot of people think like Saturnalia and like all of these like Bacchic rituals where it was just fucking orgies and like everyone's getting fucked up and shit. But the problem was they never really said what was going in these wines. We know that their brewing practices really only push them to like 14% alcohol, which I'm not sure about you, but I've never really reached like total fucking awful depravity and Dionysian ecstasy on a box of Franzia.
I don't know what party he's been to.
I know, right? Maybe you just have the wrong friends.
I'm just saying. Not to brag, but yeah. Boone's Farm can get you pretty far.
Yeah. But like some of the effects that they described are not really quite possible or known with alcohol. So we know that they were adding things to it, which based on some of the writings, we know that they were adding other roots and herbs and shit into their wine. It wasn't just fermented grape juice. We know this, but based on later writings of turn of the millennia authors, especially like turn of the millennia, like Gnostic Christian authors, who actually condoned the use of certain herbs. We know they were using things like, the more popular ones were drugs like henbane, but particularly mandrake. That was a very, very popular one for the Romans and early Christians. Mandrake was the tits, which I don't understand why, because it's a very, very bitter, disgusting herb. But if you're in the middle of Europe, you don't have a whole lot of options as getting super fucked up that you have with other cultures. Cannabis was used as well. Cannabis was used quite a lot by them. So really, like, early Europe, you had those three that were used a lot, and opium. Opium was another drug that was used for magical purposes.
Yeah, cannabis and opium would have come from more the Middle Eastern area, correct? During the
Right.
time of the Roman Empire, where they were spread out that far east.
Yeah. But and one fun thing that I learned during my research and everything is a lot of the Roman and early church kind of thing they had with, is particularly with like magical practices. They had people who would go to cunning women, which were basically witches, in order to get love filters or love potions, and almost always these love potions involved opium.
Of course it does.
Yeah, you would give this love potion to the person you were wanting to basically hook up with, and just get them hooked on opium so that they would just keep coming back to you.
Okay, that seems pretty fucked up.
Do you think that's the only thing? Because like low levels of like opiates can just generally make one more sociable and more wanting physical contact and like being the cuddle,
Yeah.
desire and stuff of it. Do you think it's just like getting them addicted, or also
No,
just like getting
no,
them
there
more
was
in the mood? Like, hey,
right.
yeah, I feel
Yes.
great. Let's do this. Let's get close.
Yeah, no, it definitely had that kind of like aphrodisiac effect.
I'm not saying it's that much better as far as a date rapey sort of way, but I'm saying like it's not necessarily addiction that's doing it. It's also the
Right.
effects of it.
Yeah, no, it definitely had the kind of like aphrodisiac effects that you're talking about. But there was also that thing like getting someone hooked so that they would keep coming back to you.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah, that's really fucked up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're here laughing about it, but
That's okay. It's fine. The people that it happened to are all dead, so whatever. It's fine.
Okay.
I think it's really hard to put like our moral judgments on past cultures. Like things are just way different then than there is now, and we can't really know exactly what their intentions were because the culture is so much different.
Yeah, dude, I totally agree. And I think that, like, if anything, it just invites us to sort of, like, examine the shit in our own culture that might raise some questions if people read about it in the future, right? Like,
Really good point. Yeah.
okay, so you brought up the point of, like, Gnosis, right? And the idea of, like, Gnostic Christianity. Like, where do these substances show up in the history of that?
With Gnostic Christianity, they, like I had mentioned that mandrake was a particularly popular one, and the reason for mandrake being so popular amongst Gnostic Christians is it had a soporific effect, which means it induced sleep. And so the early Christians liked using mandrake because it would put them into a dream state where they could then start dreaming about, God and shit. And put them basically put them into like another mental or dimensional state where they were focusing on the entity or like the deity and angels and all of that shit. And in fact, like early Christian fathers like Origen and I think Augustine had mentioned shit like No, it's fine taking these drugs because when you're asleep, you're not sinning.
Are you sure you can't sin in your sleep?
And that
Well,
is
I feel like you might
thought-
be able to.
And this might be the wrong perception of me, but I thought the Gnostics had a little looser definition about sin and such.
yes, they did.
Than what we would consider like nowadays
Yes.
Christian sin.
Yes, they did. But like this was like getting more into it starting to become like a state religion kind of thing with later Christian authors. They were totally fine with it, but even the earlier Gnostic Christians that you're kind of mentioning, yeah, they were still using mandrake and things like cannabis because it got them into states that allowed basically like let them become more in tune with divinity, how they saw it.
As a side note, mandrake has so many like fun, there's so much fun lore surrounding it as a plant. Like the idea that like you can't pull it out of the ground because it will scream or whatever. There's like all these like, fun things about it. Like,
Yeah, I mean I've played that video game that does that. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head.
One of the myths behind it is like with that whole pulling it out of the ground and it killing you based on its screaming, that was actually with the mythology behind it, part of the reason the early Christians and whatever were using it, because one of the myths behind it is that the root itself looks anthropomorphic. It looks like a human body but without a head. And so they were like tying that into the fact that like, okay, well, you like this root represents the Jewish people in that they have no leader, they have no head, unlike us Christians, and so we are celebrating the use of this root by incorporating it with Jesus, who then becomes the head of our church.
So I mean this made me think. So it would that increase like lucid dreaming and such, because it doesn't just induce dreaming. It's supposed to like increase or induce sleep. It's supposed to increase like lucid dreaming or very active dreaming. Something similar to like mugwort or anything.
In lower doses, yes. In higher doses, it does cause hallucinations. It does cause ecstatic states.
Ah, okay.
I thought it could also cause some like serious cramping and shit too.
Yes, it also has that too. There are negative side effects, like one of them
Yes.
being death.
Yeah, that's actually dangerous. Like I don't think mugwort is really dangerous.
I don't think it's
No.
that. I mean, I think
At
that
all.
you would have to
So
have to
that way
probably
it's not
ingest like so much of it to have it be dangerous, sort of.
For mugwort to be dangerous, you would probably have to eat your entire body weight, which the fact that you have your entire body weight inside of your stomach, that would be what killed you.
You can also die from drinking too much water, everybody, right? Like,
Yeah.
True.
Like it's everything in moderation. Everything in moderation. But then with also or other historical uses of entheogens is we have because I had mentioned Mesoamerica with the psilocybin and ayahuasca, which are pretty well known, where they'll have just ceremonies in surrounding these where everyone drinks ayahuasca and just chills out and receives the visions that they get. But other entheogens we have are like tobacco. Tobacco was used a lot in Native American practices, and that's like it had a sacred, or it still has amongst those cultures a sacred place. But one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that the tobacco that we have now is the species Nicotiana tabacum, which is the one that's primarily sold in like cigarettes and cigars and chewing tobacco and shit like that. And Nicotiana tabacum has a percentage of nicotine at about like 2 to 3% by weight of nicotine. But the tobacco that was being used by most Native Americans during their smoking rituals was Nicotiana rustica, which sits at around like 9% tobacco or 9% nicotine by weight. The Nicotiana rustica that was used, and the vial that Quilon had shown us and has with her, that was used in a Amazonian practice, and it's called rape. And what that is it's snuff, essentially. It's tobacco snuff. And so it's ground powdered tobacco that is then inserted into a straw and then blown into your sinuses, which they use for lots of different purposes, one of them being like centering and grounding yourself and bringing you like back into like a, especially during ayahuasca rituals, like it would be blown into your sinuses to bring you back into yourself.
Do you think that would work with other types of hallucinogens than ayahuasca?
I don't know. Like I kind of want to, just fucking take a hero dose of mushrooms and blow some shit up my nose. We'll find out.
We'll set a date sometime. We'll try it out.
Yeah.
But yeah. I don't feel like I can accurately describe Dreadnought's ritual. It was for an event that we had gone to, and he had used the snuff up the nose with the straw blowing up to center people before a particular ritual, before giving a tribute or a gift to a particular god that we're using it for.
Okay, hell yeah.
And like I was the one who had made the rape for it, and I've used it, and it has it's very, very intense if you're not used to it at all, like, because having it blown up into your sinuses, it immediately hits on, and just like you immediately, like, if you are a smoker, or if you've smoked or used tobacco before, that kind of like nicotine buzz that you first get and everything, it's like that, but a bit stronger, because it immediately hits, and it's like in your sinuses. So like it's all right there right now, and it is a very intense experience if you haven't done it before.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Okay, so just real quickly, you had mentioned that there was some modern day applications that people might find from looking at these like ancient applications of, substances which could induce chemognosis. And, a lot of them you had said like they're legal, but they're also like toxic too. And we were kind of talking about that a little bit already with the henbane thing, right?
Yeah. So other legal ones that are still like very intense and shit, like, yes, henbane is legal and has practical uses, like as far as the brewing, and because henbane was used in Europe for a bitterant in beer prior to the introduction of hops, and so like henbane was the shit as far as flavoring goes in Europe for alcohol. And it's still legal and you can use it, but it's related to like nightshade and shit, so it is still toxic, but it also, with the introduction of like scopolamine and other like atropine alkaloids, you're still going to have like, hallucinations and shit at higher doses. There are other chemicals and plants that are legal that have hallucinogenic or psychoactive properties. So one that comes to mind is Amanita Muscaria, which was and is used primarily by like the Sami people in northern Finland and Siberia. It's also known as fly agaric. It's a psychoactive mushroom that is not at all similar to psilocybe cubensis, which is magic mushrooms that most people are familiar with.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think this is something that you guys talk about in the interview too. Like, I think just the idea of like the difference between like, the experience of eating an amanita versus like a psilocybe. Amanita, I think you guys were saying like was, you'd eat it and like you're like, oh fuck, I need to like go lay down and go to sleep or whatever.
Yeah, that was my experience with it. It was it very much induced like a heavy feeling, and I needed to lay down. Like, whereas like psilocybe cubensis is like, yeah, this is great and I feel awesome and we're gonna party for a bit. With Amanita Muscaria, it's like, no, I need to take a nap. This is really heavy right now.
Yeah, for sure. I think like with psilocybin mushrooms, like it's definitely more of like a feeling of curiosity and playfulness than anything else. I don't know.
Well, the mushroom you're talking about, that's more of, isn't that the mushroom that's like considered like the Alice in Wonderland mushroom?
What, the Amanita Muscaria?
Yeah, I believe so. Like the red mushroom.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
with the white dots on it.
Yeah. It's kind of a classic, mushroom look, right? I mean, we've all seen these.
Mm-hmm. It very much does have psychoactive properties. Like, along with the whole like me wanting to lay down and take a nap, it did very much have like time distillation where like a minute seemed to take hours to pass by. There were visual distortions where things that I knew the size of looked either bigger or smaller than what they actually were. But again, it's also a toxic fucking mushroom. So the dose is very important on it, and with a lot of these plants, it's very difficult to get a proper dosage because the chemicals that are present in them can vary so much. So the Amanita muscaria caps just by themselves can be fucking huge. Like, the cap themselves, or the cap itself, can be the size of your hand, and knowing how much of a dose of whatever chemical you're going to get from just one cap, and that's not even taking into account like when it was harvested, what it was growing around. Like, there are lots of different variables that can affect what the dosage is going to be. And so like my general rule for ingesting any substance has always been start off very, very small and see how it affects you from there, because you can always add more, you can't take away.
Also, this doesn't count for allergies because people do have allergies to some of these things
Yeah,
and will
right.
have reactions.
Yeah. It's kind of like with fucking hair dye and shit. You've got to like test a very small piece on your skin before applying
Test
it
your
to your whole.
skin.
Yeah.
Oh, spot.
Just test a tiny little spot before applying it to your whole fucking head.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Do a patch test.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I did listen to this interview and it's super dope. I'm excited for everybody to hear it.
I do have one question before we start the interview. Comparing the difference between finding gnosis through like meditation or these sort, other ways, excitation stuff, and like using a chemical, what is the difference? I mean, I think we all might have opinions on this. What is the advantage or disadvantage of using a chemical versus trying to find gnosis in other ways?
Okay, that's a very good question. And so from my own experience, like, I've tested a lot of chemicals just because I consider myself a psychonaut and I want to know where I can push my own mind, how far I can push it, and shit like that. And there have been a lot of psychoactive chemicals that I've used for the purpose of magic, getting me into a certain state. And I know it's mentioned in the interview, and we didn't really talk about it right so far, but like with things that aren't necessarily like psychoactive in the fact that you get hallucinations or visions or things like that, but that can also push you into more of a Gnostic state, like uppers. So things like MDMA, or one that is assumed within or by most anthropologists within the Vedic texts, they mention a drink called soma, but it's never really said what that plant is. It's been kind of described, and most people agree that it was referring to ephedra. With that, it it boosts your attentiveness, it boosts your ability to focus on things, which is what what a Gnostic state is about. It's a point of single-mindedness, and there are lots of different chemicals that I've tried that have no purpose, that I can see so far as my experience goes, like diphenhydramine being one of them. It works as a deliriant, and it just does nothing except like completely destroy your memory, or your short-term memory anyway. But these chemicals that do offer kind of like a kickstart into a Gnostic state, or something that, like, say ephedra, or even fucking psilocybin mushrooms, or like other psychoactive chemicals, like they have a purpose in that it makes it easier for sometimes group ritual, where you're all wanting to get into a similar state at once. Because some, like, as you had mentioned with like meditation, sometimes people aren't as great with meditation, and it can take longer for them to achieve a Gnostic state with that. But if you're wanting to just jumpstart everyone into the same state of mind, yeah, it's a lot easier if you all eat some mushrooms.
Yeah, or the example earlier with Dreadnought's ritual with the nicotine. You get somebody, you can get each individual into the state you want them in.
Right. But there also is the caveat then, because it can kind of jumpstart you into this Gnostic state. There have been lots of magicians, and I've known a few of them who use these chemicals as like a magical crutch, where they know that they can immediately get into this magical state of thinking by using this chemical, and so always use this chemical in order to get into a magical state. And so that's where I'd like to reiterate the kind of disclaimer that we had at the beginning, where you don't have to use chemicals to practice magic. You don't. And I want to, strongly emphasize that you do not have to use chemicals to get into a Gnostic state. I know that there's very much a rich magical history, what with shamans and medicine doctors and like cunning women and shit like that, of using chemicals, but you don't have to use it. And there's a fine line between using chemicals to get into this state, and you walk a thin line where you can start getting into mentality where you just start, the only way where you can practice magic is if you're fucking on a fucking bender, and that just, yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, responding to that, I would have to, like I say, I think it's a really good point, like using Chemognosis in like a group setting in order to get people into a similar state of mind makes sense. And you mentioned like shamanism and things where you are trying to help somebody else get into a Gnostic state who may not practice any sort of magic, you know? But I think someone who's actually practicing magic should be working on being able to reach Gnosis without it. And in fact, being able to use meditation and other forms of Gnostic practices can actually make your experiences using these chemicals way better. It's going to be stronger when you do use them. You can be more in control of it. Yeah, and keeping that in perspective, that it's a tool you can use, but like ultimately, like you need to be working on your own mental state and ability to work in Gnosis. And there's a strength to be able to do that without any sort of chemicals or any sort of interference.
I think that's a really good point. And like, I would just build a little bit more on it too. And in addition to what Yara said, also is like, you don't want to rely on one certain way of doing things, right? Like, no matter what it is, like, you want to have all of these different tools in your toolbox to use when the time is appropriate, right?
Yeah, and I think if you do want to use the tools of Chemognosis, I think having the other tools make them more useful.
Absolutely.
You're not, yeah, like, I mean, we haven't brought up some of the stronger drugs, like using acid or using things like we all know, like those are the things that are being used a lot, mushrooms and things are very strong. But I think, or DMT or things like that, but I think having a practice of meditation is going to make any experience you have of those psychoactive drugs more effective.
Or even just bringing it back to like the really, really simple, like, bare bones practice of like, sigil magic and shit. Like, you don't want to have to rely on one specific way of doing that shit. Like,
Christ.
Yeah, can you imagine
That would just
taking those
fucking be
drugs like all the
expensive.
time just to do the magic?
it's just not, it's not a sustainable way of practicing,
Right, like,
It's impractical, and it's also not. I don't think it's healthy, like personally, but that's a personal feeling.
Yeah, and there'll be diminishing returns with any of this shit,
Exactly.
right, and like you had mentioned, Cologne, like having like a basis in or magical practices such as meditation, getting you into a state that makes these chemognostic states much more manageable. So one thing that shows up amongst people who have used or have access to DMT a lot is that because it's such like a mind-shattering experience, being able to kind of like meditate and get yourself into a frame of mind where you can enter this, or where you can slowly ease yourself into, okay, well, now I'm going to prepare myself for this giant journey ahead, as opposed to like, all right, let's fucking flame this up and see where the fuck we go. Like it would have a much more useful purpose, like meditating into it and creating a ritual out of it, and seeing
Yeah.
that, like, yes, this is a tool, but it's also like a tool that should be used like sparingly. Like, okay, so take any other tool, like say I have a fucking hydraulic press, right? It's really good at fucking pressing things, but I'm not going to fucking use a hydraulic press every time I need to put a nail into something. Like, I'm not going to use a hydraulic press in order to hang a picture on my wall. Yeah.
Yeah.
When the only
that's-
tool that you have is a hydraulic press, everything starts to look
Yeah.
like-
Yeah, yeah. The only tool you have a hammer, everything's a nail. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, and the whole like DMT especially, we're talking about like, some people talk about meditation being like practice for death, and we all talk about like how some of these drugs can induce a sort of ego death. I think having a background in meditation can definitely prepare you for that experience, so that's not as scary and something you can learn from.
Yeah, and that was
Definitely.
one thing that, as much as I kind of dislike the dude Terrence McKenna, he had a kind of tool used for if you're in an ego death state, or if you're in a psychoactive state where you feel as though you are kind of losing everything and you're like in a spiral of anxiety and shit like that. One of the methods that he mentions of centering yourself regardless of what your state of mind is at is, he mentions singing, but it's really like the use of the vocal cords. And so like I've used this before, and I've offered it to others when they're in a state where they're starting to get anxious and they don't know what's going on and they're confused. The best thing that I have offered, both through my own experience and offering to other people, is by using the mantra Om. So if you're in a state of confusion and anxiety, just stop and just repeat Om. Just say it out, Om, and focus on your vocal cords. Focus on that sound escaping your lips, and that will like start bringing you back and focusing you, and it will like steer you away from that anxiety and confusion and possible, existential terror that you may go through with higher doses of like hallucinogens.
Yeah, sure. Like the potential, like psychological trauma or whatever. And I think that Nikki brings this up in the interview too, like having this kind of escape route. Like maybe it's a gesture or a change of setting or whatever. Like, but having that sort of built into, again, your toolkit. Like, when you're having these like spiraling thoughts, maybe when you're experimenting with these things, go into another room, change the setting, right? Like it could be that simple.
Yeah. Set and setting is extremely important with any chemical that you would use for magical purposes. You don't want to just like drop a bunch of acid before going into a fucking business meeting in the hopes that, you know, it might help you with a fucking raise or some shit, because that's not going to work.
I'm guessing that the people listening to this already get that, but yes, that's
Okay,
right.
well, that's I'm hope. Well, I would
We hope
think.
so. We
It's
hope so.
not Gnosis. Like, I wouldn't want to necessarily go into Gnosis in a business meeting or a
You know
staff
what, though?
meeting or something.
People's practices are all their own, so if that's what you feel you need to do,
I don't
you
recommend
do,
it.
but maybe not the choice I would make. That's okay. Okay, so I'm stoked to get to this interview though, y'all. Like, I have listened to it. It is fucking dope. Nikki brings a lot of like really cool shit to the table.
Yeah,
Can you
so,
tell us a little bit, Yara, like about
Yeah. So for this interview, we interviewed Nikki Weird, who is she is a longtime psychonaut and magician. She is the primary editor, or I think she's the head editor for Psychedelic Press Journal. So it's a biannual magazine / journal that comes out and talks about the like laws and things that are going through with psychedelics. They use a lot, or they have a lot of art and writings about psychedelics, and just lots of different things about psychedelics and how it incorporates itself into culture and shit like that. But she's also a long time magician, and and that was the reason we had contacted her, because like she has a wealth of experience dating back decades. She did also mention that after the interview, some of the things that we would like to point out, which she does have a book out that you can read. She had written the Book of Baphomet, which talks about like psychedelic use and like invocation and knowledge of Baphomet. She also runs the blog of Baphomet.com, which has a lot of useful information about like psychedelics and magic and things like that.
Yeah, I've read it. It's very good.
Yeah, like we were super excited that she was willing to take part in this interview, just because of the wealth of information and what she like her experience with psychedelics, which is extensive, but also like her extensive knowledge of magic in general and how these two can be incorporated. That's Nikki Weird, and we are one last thing I would like to say though is she is based in the UK, and if you follow like the blog of Baphomet.com, she'll post information on like gatherings and things like that. So if you are in the UK or happen to be going to the UK, you could possibly go to like one of her lectures or some shit like that, which is you absolutely should do, because it's she's a phenomenal source of information and a wealth of experience.
Okay. Fuck yeah. All right.
Awesome.
So should we get into it here?
Hell yeah.
Yeah, here comes the interview coming next. Introduced by Sailor Cologne herself,
The one and only.
the interview.
We'd like to take this time to acknowledge our partnership with our sponsor, Welcome to Paradise. Not only do they carry occult and ritual items that have been personally vetted and created by practicing occultists, they've partnered up with the Faithblind Council to provide you with exclusive offerings from your hosts. Tarot consultations by Dreadnought, hand-carved leather by Cologne, and custom talismans from Yaramarud are just a few of the items sold by Welcome to Paradise in their collection of occult artists. If you're a magical artist looking for a place to showcase your goods, why not join the Paradise team? Whether it's to sell your work or to add another piece to your collection, please visit our sponsors at welcometoparadise.com.
Hey, Frater Yarmarud here, and I want to let you know about a chaos magic app that I'm really excited about. It's called Trinary, the magic web app, and it's the first one I've come across that's more than just one function you end up finding no use for and uninstalling. Of course, as a chaos magic app, it has to have sigil creation, but Trinary provides so much more than your run-of-the-mill squiggles. With the Kamea sigils, you get to personalize how they're created and what the output is. Accepting Latin, Cyrillic, and Hebrew characters, you can also change its appearance for whatever you need it for. Not only that, you can choose outputs like mudras, yoga poses, musical notes, and more. And that's just the beginning. Trinary also offers divination through the forms of I Ching, tarot, oracle cards, numerology, and runes with multiple choices and customizable spreads. Believe it or not, that's only half of it. Pathworking, Geison's Dream Machine, Gematria, and even more all in a single app. Seriously, you need to check this app out and see its functionality for yourself. To do so, just go to app.chaostarot.com and start your practice easily. All right, and we are here with Nikki Weird, and we are so happy that she is with us. Nikki is an editor for some of the most important books of the psychedelic renaissance. She's currently chair, executive director of Breaking Convention, which is a charity that holds Europe's largest conference on psychedelics. And she is editor of the quarterly periodical Psychedelic Press Journal. And we are so happy to have you with us, Nikki.
I'm very happy to be here. Thanks, Yaramarud. Sorry about that.
Yaramarud, it's okay. You can just call me Yara. It's fine.
We usually, he usually goes by Yara Madood, so.
Oh, I like that, Yara Madood. Yeah, that's got a ring to it.
So we have a lot of questions from our listeners, and I am excited to talk about Chemognosis with you. And speaking of which, what was your first Chemognosis experience? And what things should people be aware of when kind of jumping into the idea of Chemognosis?
My very first experience of Chemognosis would have been with a very unpsychedelic experience, which I had with speed. That was the first sort of thing that I was into, alongside alcohol and so forth. But rather than talk about that, which is not terribly exciting, I'll talk about my first experience that I had, which would be more of a gnosis kind of thing, rather than just talking frenetically for 2 hours, not for 2 nights non-stop. So my first experience with Chemognosis would have been mushrooms with psilocybe similanciata, which is the mushrooms that grow wild in the island of Britain. And I had those when I was about 19 or 20, and I lived in a shared house, and I had some then for the first time, and it was mushroom season, and we'd been out picking, and we came back and made a big pot of tea with all the people in the house, and they all disappeared off to go to the chip shop to go and buy chips, which is a really strange thing to do when you're tripping on mushrooms, I have to say. But
no, it very much is. I have a friend who ordered a pizza while we were doing this, and like I'd done it enough where I'm like, okay, I can handle this, but he's over in the corner just geeking out, just can't handle anything. It's like, just why did you order this? Just I have to deal with the pizza man now.
Never a good experience. Never good.
No.
But going back to that first point, I feel like with speed or like uppers in general, right? That's a very like overlooked thing when it comes to Chemognosis.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people would think of it as like Adderall or Ritalin, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Where you just get that laser beam focus on whatever it is that is like the goal of Gnosis, right? It's kind of like brute forcing your way into a Gnostic state.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's something that a lot of people tend to like. When people think of like, you know, Chemognosis or these like really big Gnostic states, they think of the, you know, the big guns of like, you know, psychedelics, dissociatives, things like that. And a lot of people don't tend to think of other chemicals, other like substances as having value.
That's a good point, actually. And one of the things that happened from various experiences with speed was that it made me come out of my shell a bit. I'd always been told as a child that I was a shy person that didn't really like talking to strangers at all. So obviously taking speed was like a complete revelation. It was like, oh, actually, I do like doing this. I just hadn't done it before. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, especially coupling that with a reasonable amount of alcohol, or sometimes slightly too much, but you know, with some alcohol as well. It's sort of just got rid of some of the inhibitions, and the coupling of those two things when you're going out on a night out was actually incredibly good for me at that particular point in my life. Well,
yeah, and with speed, it helps with alcohol. You get all of the benefits of alcohol with none of the like sleepy effects.
Yeah, and it really made me into much more of it made me realize that I was much more of a social creature than I'd ever thought I was. And I think that was the first sort of conscious thing of me going, oh, I'm not like I've been told I am. I can be something else instead. And as a chaos magician later on in my life, that was something that's been a sort of a thread that's come through from that, the way that your identity isn't fixed and that you can change things about yourself by behaving differently in whatever way.
Yeah, and that kind of gets into like Phil Hines' concept of the whole theater of magic.
Yeah, where you perform as whatever, and then you can inhabit that role much more easily.
Right. So going back to that question, what things do you think people should be aware of when getting into the concept of chemognosis?
So going back to the thing, they all went off to get fish and chips from the chip shop.
Oh, yeah.
I stayed back in the house. This is back in the, when would it have been? Late 1980s. So we had a video recorder and I was videotaping a film off of the telly, because that's what you did in those days so that you could watch it again. And I was left there to press stop when the adverts came on so that we could watch the film back again without the adverts. So I'm there.
No, I'm not going
to
focus on that shit. No, especially not your first time. No, like, you tell me to press stop.
Yeah.
No, you do this your damn self.
This is
I did
entirely
obviously
too much
give up.
responsibility.
I did give up, obviously, after a very short time, because apart from anything else, I was finding the adverts far more interesting and revelatory than the film was. Which was Monty Python's The Meaning of Life, by the way, for anyone that's interesting, which is quite a good film to be watching the first time you're on mushrooms. That's a good piece of company to have.
Absolutely.
In fact, I don't think it could be hardly better. So I was watching that and giggling and looking at all the colours in the room that I was in, which was full of all sorts of, like, it wasn't a squat, but it was in that direction kind of a house. So it's like a dressmaker's dummy and weird posters on the wall, but big Butthole Surfers poster, that kind of a place. You get the picture, like loads and loads of bootleg tapes everywhere of different music. So that's where I was when I did that. And I think the thing that I would want people to think about when they were doing that would be make sure that you're sort of like, you feel somewhere very comfortable and at home. Make sure that you've got good company. That would be the thing that I would say is one of the most important thing when you're first delving into this kind of stuff, is make sure that you're with people that you like, and that like you, because that has such a huge influence on how your own mindset is as you're going into these things. And it also means that you've got that sort of practical, loving thing to come back to, or sort of during the thing. So when the people came back from the chip shop and they were talking to me, and I felt completely at ease with them. So I knew that they'd done this sort of thing before, and they were all like really comfortable with that. So I didn't have to hide it from anything. I could be completely frank about what was going on, and it was just very easy, very nice.
Set and setting very much has a very important place when it comes to psychedelics in particular. But that was one thing that always like kind of tripped me up with like the Richard Straussman experiments with DMT, how it was like so clinical.
Yeah, it's not sort of surprising that all those people like had these sort of weird alien sort of being probed kind of experiences, or with angels and things, because they're in a medical setting with people with clipboards writing stuff down about them and like peering at them over the top of their glasses, is how I'm imagining it. So it's like, how strange that they pictured that they then met like angels in white. It's like, what? Of course they did.
Yeah, of course they did. Now go away and put on some like fucking like sarongs or something. Get out of here.
Wear a pair of jeans. Come on.
Yeah, something.
I feel like we could all agree that one of the worst things is when you're high and then have to pretend that you're not.
Oh yeah. It can be fun, but rarely is that the case.
Very rarely.
That was, I think, my biggest experience with like THC when I was in high school was like I would smoke a joint and then have to spend the next like 4 hours pretending that I hadn't just smoked a joint and like just bathing in all of the worst fucking body wash and like Axe deodorant, and then like showing up like, hey, everything's normal. Do you guys got like 4 gallons of water that I could borrow? And then people ask you why you want to borrow water. It's a whole goddamn thing. But I think it's really interesting. There's a nomenclature like where people will say things if you're doing like with psychedelic experiences of like, trust your babysitter, right? And it's, to me, it kind of like indicative of what the experience is, where you're kind of unlocking these things that could be new experiences, could be ways of you dealing with past experiences. And like, it's the same as if you were to be like taking care of a child, in the sense of like, it's just interesting to me that people use the term babysitter with that a lot. At least in the US, that's kind of like the word that gets thrown around. I don't know where I was going with that. I just thought it was a really interesting kind of like coincidence.
Although you did kind of raise another question in me. Nikki, how do you feel about the concept of like modern shamanism when it comes to psychedelics? Like, do you think that there is a place for someone who is like experienced dosing someone else?
Just another way of doing it. So when I became involved in that kind of scene, it was a scene. So there wouldn't have been a person that was the person that had the drugs and then gave them out to other people and then directed what was happening. It was just people did it in houses or when we went out to nightclubs, and that was how it was. So it was a much more sort of peer-to-peer network kind of setting rather than someone controlling it. But the other way of looking at it is that it can be really useful to have some kind of direction. So it wouldn't be that the shaman in a good situation, or one that I would consider good, a shaman wouldn't be controlling what was going on, but they would be supporting others to find their way through it. So they'd be giving helpful hints about sort of, oh, let's put this cushion over here, let's make sure that the lights are down so that they're not in people's eyes, and just generally sort of helping with the scene setting and doing the equivalent to people's minds as well, so that they're helping them to feel at ease and sparking up ideas about what they might want to be looking for in this session, sorting out what the soundscape was going to be, whether it's going to be drumming or humming or other types of things. So they'd be there as a sort of facilitatory kind of thing. And the best sessions that I've been to have had more than one person playing that kind of role. So you'll have like 2 or 3 people doing the sort of the organizing of the space and helping other people to do stuff. So it's just a different way of doing it. And certainly if we're doing it in a magically kind of way, then that can be a really helpful way of doing it, because it just has somebody that's vocalizing and asking you what it is you want from this, and then that sort of makes you think about it in a slightly different way than if you're purely doing it in let's bosh it in my head and see what happens, which has its own value.
It has its merits.
In some cases. Yeah.
I think that sometimes you just need to experience whatever substance you're taking. You just need to experience what that has to offer without going into it. It would be no different in my mind than going to like a classroom, like if you're auditing a class or something and being like, these are the things I am going to learn from this class. And then you go in and the lesson plan is completely different. Mm-hmm. And now you're completely up shit's creek. I think it's important to be able to go into things with an open mind. But I think it's important because like doing things with intent is always how you get from A to B. But like it's a thing. One thing I can think of just kind of tangentially is I had this idea for ritualizing DMT. Mm-hmm. And the feedback I got from it, given like, without going into a bunch of specifics of like, this is what I want to accomplish with the ritual. And this is, DMT would be the substance I'd want to use for X, Y, and Z. And the feedback I got was like, no, you are not going to be able to get any kind of like group consensus with that particular substance. Like it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, you're going into space all by yourself.
And in that regard, kind of tying it back to the idea of having like a shaman or it's no different than having like, in Tantra, like, having a guru, someone who's walked that path before, who can tell you like, you are shit-faced. You do not need to be doing this right now.
You do not need to be ordering fucking 2 large pizzas, Tony. Slow down.
Yeah, you see, in that sort of situation, a shaman could be incredibly helpful, couldn't they? So.
Yeah, but I mean, and I see the other side of it as well, where like at some point, the best way to figure it out is to do it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
And obviously, like, that doesn't mean like, hey, I'm going to go into this like opium den and just lose my mind for fucking 4 days. Not a great idea, but like, doing your research and figuring out what you can expect. It's the same as like, I don't know if you've ever been there's a subreddit called Not How Drugs Work.
That's cool. Yeah.
And it's just a bunch of stories of people trying to say like, man, I was on acid and I saw dragons and they were fighting cars. And everyone's like, that's what? Like, you don't want to be that person.
Oh, no. I was thinking about this earlier on, and I was thinking about an analogy, and I was thinking, so if you want to play a game of football, you don't go into a supermarket and start playing there, do you? So you've got to go into the right arena. So you know you want to have the sort of the map of where it is you're headed to for what it is you want to achieve. And it's the same with any experience, let alone any psychedelic or any psychoactive experience. You've got to know where you're going and what you want to do there to some extent.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy.
That might be that you want to experience the universe in a particular kind of way. So you just want to throw yourself into the universe, but you want to throw yourself into part of the universe that probably doesn't have too much traffic to negotiate, and that probably looks, at least a bit interesting, and in the company of people that you can, go along with as good fellow travelers. So even if you're just going for a sort of more fluid psychogeographical wander through the world and just seeing what things leap out at you from the world, rather than relying on a person as a guru, you take the universe as your guru for that particular trip. You still want to point yourself in the right kind of direction and be in a state where you can walk around on 2 feet without falling over. So yeah, you got to just plan it a little bit.
No, I really like that analogy. But that does bring us this conversation to another question that we had. Do all substances have magical uses, or are some of them just fun? This person said that they use kratom almost daily, but can't think of any sort of spiritual use for it.
I really like that question, because it's always fascinating when people say magic or fun.
Right. No, magic is absolutely fun. Yeah. Like they're wrong if they approach it from that perspective. Like, part of the reason that I do magic, yes, number one, it works, but two, it's fun as shit.
It makes me think of the villain in Matilda. Just nothing is fun or funny. That's just what it makes me think of. Like, the two things go hand in hand.
But sometimes the things that you go into. I've written about this before, and it's sometimes the things that you go into as a purely sort of recreational. I'm putting quote marks around that recreational trip. You just, I'm just going to have some fun. You end up having the most amazing insights into yourself and tripping out really hard, seeing lovely mandalas, all sorts of amazing things. And then other times you'll go into an experience wanting to have like deep, insightful stuff, and you end up not really getting much out of it at all. And it's so the intent that you go into it with is not always like what you come out with. So the magical use fun part of it can sometimes swerve categorically into the other direction. That's something that's been noted by people from way back. I wrote that in connection with a thing in the journal where some people were comparing very strong cannabis trips, and there were some of them that were trying it in a sort of experimental way. This is back in the 1800s. They were trying it in a really experimental way and sort of trying to write notes about what they're feeling and what they're seeing and stuff. And the whole thing is just so funny that they end up just having a complete really amazing time and rolling around on the floor and just having extreme laughter fits from it. And then there's another group of people at a similar sort of time that go into it with this sort of really deep sort of spiritual, oh yeah, we're going to find out things about that and sort of see how the Hindu people experience the world, and they go into it and it's really boring for them. But yeah, to get back to the thing, it's actually a really good question, because it's the magical use isn't intrinsic in the substance. The magical use is intrinsic in the combination of the magician and the substance and the environment and the things leading up to and away from that experience. The magic is like the whole process as it all comes together. It's not inherent. I can't pick up a thing and go, this has magic within it, if you look at it hard enough under a microscope. So it's to do with the way that you use it. So in that way, everything has potential to have magical use. The most common sacrament that I use at the moment is water. Because
interesting.
So that's the sacrament that I use. That's because it's such an extraordinary substance in all sorts of different ways.
Oh yeah, it's like I've been doing a lot of alchemy and chemistry and stuff like that, and the use of water itself is amazing. I mean, it's the universal solvent.
Yep.
Viewing any kind of any chemical substance, you're basically viewing it like a tool, right? A hammer is not inherently good or inherently evil. It's the person that picks a hammer up and takes it to their fucking neighbor. That's not a great way to use a hammer. But the hammer
unless
itself,
you're taking it to your neighbor to help him out with, building his shed.
Yeah, sure. That works too. But yeah, it's very much viewing these things from kind of like a utilitarian standpoint, in the sense of yes, they are, they give these experiences and they help you to kind of broaden your horizons and your perspective about things, but like the substance itself is not the like active ingredient almost. It's very much your mind that is informing what's like how you're interpreting things, I guess.
Yes, I totally go along with that. I've only had kratom on one occasion, and the first glass of it that I had, I really liked, and I felt like quite sort of floaty and quite nice on it. Then the second one that I had after that tipped me into the complete like dizzy, nauseous state, which you can get into, like being extremely drunk, which is incredibly unpleasant.
I've done kratom before where like it brought me that kind of like opioid sense of floating and everything, but it also had that effect of wanting to be talkative and things like that. But nausea, definitely. I know friends who use kratom and they just take a spoonful of it and shove it in their mouths, which I don't understand how the fuck they can do that because it's like eating sand. It's so bad, and they just wash it down with water. Like, no, that doesn't get rid of that. Like whenever I used it, I put it in capsules, so I didn't have to taste it because it tastes like dirty tea.
Yep. The person that prepared it for me blended it up with some like special recipe that they'd got involving like various fruits and so forth, and it was really good. The first glass, I wish I'd just stayed with that first glass. It was really nice. I was really doing that, like you say, the sort of the opioidy sort of floaty, and it was really nice. We were having a really relaxed, nice conversation about. I can't remember what the particular subject was, but it was sort of like about personal issues and working through things. It was quite a sort of therapeutic, nice sort of way of talking because of the people that I was with and the way that we were talking with each other about the thing. So it wasn't intrinsic. The substance was helping that to happen. It was just part of the scene setting thing. So it was magical from that point of view, but I'm not quite sure how you could use it. I'm not really experienced enough to advise anything that you could use it for, but just sort of maybe self-discovery stuff, maybe if you're just sort of like conversing with someone that you know really well.
Most of these questions come from our Discord server, and there was a short discussion after that involving kratom use as far as magic goes, and one person had suggested just using it as an offering because typically within most paradigms, really, things like stimulants tend to be offered to ancestors, like things like coffee or tobacco, things like that. Just so like using it as an offering in that sense, but nobody had really given any insight as far as like ingesting it and a magical use for that.
I mean, like, honestly, the one that I could come up with just kind of off the top of my head for that is not intrinsically spiritual, but like the experiences I've had with it have been like all of the like, you know, chronic joint pain I just don't care about anymore. And it makes meditation a lot easier. It's a lot easier to just sit there for an extended period of time. Normally after like 15 or 20 minutes, like my knees are killing me. My back starts to hurt. My shoulders are starting to like feel like they're on fire. The experiences I've had with kratom using it for that, like, it's not that stuff's not there. It's just a lot easier for me to like observe and then move on. I'm just like, oh, okay, my knees hurt. Let's get back to, you know, whatever object concentration I'm doing or whatever at that moment. So again, it's not that it's like necessarily intrinsically a spiritual experience, but you can use those things to kind of help. And then obviously you get that kind of nice, like relaxed kind of opioid vibe that is conducive to meditation, in my opinion, anyways. So again, it comes down to like, how are you using this tool?
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question we have is Sangamon's principle says the simplest molecules make the best drugs because they are more chemically predictable. Do you have any strong opinions on this?
So my quick answer is no. But then I thought about it a bit more and checked up on what Sangamon's principle actually is, which is the idea that it's a character in a book by Neil Stevenson, for those that aren't aware of this. And it's the idea that molecules which are really simple, so things like oxygen, for example, is very, very simple. Therefore, it is good, is what this character in the book is saying. And then as they get more and more complex, the idea that this character has is that then they are less predictable in the effect that they have on anything that they come into contact with. And so therefore they are not so good. Now, there are a number of things to question about this, like how is oxygen a drug? I guess at that point you're calling everything a drug in the universe, which is a bit like not terribly helpful in a postmodern kind of way. So.
That's no worse than the people who are like, do you understand how many chemicals are in that? Yeah, there's 400 chemicals in a cup of coffee. Fuck off.
So I guess the thing from that, like having worked in medicine, when you pump somebody full of oxygen, like just straight, like put the mask on them and like just like bolus that shit and they're getting nothing but oxygen.
Then it's a drug.
In that way will create like a euphoric experience.
Yes. And is it quite predictably that it is euphoric as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so in that way, yeah, I could see if you're talking about oxygen as a drug, but like to sit there and say like, man, everything is a drug, like, okay, like it bothers me when people say shit like that because it almost always comes from people who don't have a lot of experience with something. And it in a weird way harkens back to, I can't remember who it was, who had a quote about pornography that said, I'm not going to further define it, but I know it when I see it. And I think that like, if you take kind of the soul of that quote, like it applies to, you know, what is and isn't a drug as well. Like, or I guess like a lot of it comes from this idea of viewing drugs through a standpoint of addiction, where like anything is drug because anything can be addictive. So like then that doesn't really track when you're trying to talk about the utility and the use of different substances.
Right, and that even goes back to how Nikki were saying using water itself. That's an extremely simple molecule, but it has a lot of applications.
Well, yeah, and also you can drink too much water and then you get hydrotoxicity
and die. Yeah.
So. It's happened to people, unfortunately. So that's a bit of an odd question because obviously it's the character in the book that's saying these simple molecules make the best drug rather than the person that asked the question. But I'm not entirely sure that saying that complicated drugs are less predictable. It's fairly predictable what a lot of them do. And even things like food and sort of carbohydrates, they're incredibly massive molecules. They're not like simple or small in any way, but you can really predict what they're going to do. So I don't know. I'm not quite sure about the sort of what the intent behind this question is, so I can't really quite answer it, and I'm not a chemist.
Well, there's that, and okay, so we had talked about DMT, and with DMT just being dimethyltryptamine, you can add a phosphorus oxygen ring on it and make it 4-PO dimethyltryptamine, which is another name for psilocybin, which is still it's a drug that's very understanded. It's one that is very predictable, but it's more complicated than just DMT, even though DMT is extremely itself unpredictable. You don't know where the fuck you're going when you launch off into space. But whereas with psilocybin, like generally, you know what's going to happen.
Yeah, the same things go on, don't they?
Yeah. There are a few like markers that you're going to recognize with psilocybin, whereas like, you know, something more simple, or I would even go like to another level if you're talking about like LSD, right? Like LSD is a massively complex like chemical just from a structural point of view. It's fucking massive, right? But like for a long time, like that was my preferred method of like accessing psychedelic experiences because it was much more structured. It was much more predictable. You could tell like, okay, I've hit this like milestone in the evening. I've hit this milestone. I'm here. I'm you know, peaking, and then like it's a more gradual come down, right?
Well, and it's kind of the same with like pharmaceuticals too, as opposed to natural things like mushrooms or THC, where you say you take a pill, you know exactly what the dosage is, you know exactly what it's going to do, whereas like with mushrooms, it's kind of a toss. Like you don't know like what's the strength of it, what's the strain, who knows like how much fucking psilocybin is even in this. Like,
let alone all of the other different compounds that are in it, things like biocystin and so forth, and psilocin. There could be any amount of different things in there. So
right, and depending upon the strain, it could be entirely different. Like you can't just say, I'm going to take 3 grams of this and I know exactly what's going to happen. It could be entirely different between strains, between like
different grows. Nature itself is unpredictable, whereas things with that are chemically structured and manufactured, we know exactly what's going into it, exactly how much, and you know exactly what to expect.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, to borrow from like the parlance of competitive gaming, it's been min-maxed, where like people have manufactured these things down to where like they are creating the experience through like engineering. You know, obviously you have the, you know, shitheads that are like adding fentanyl to stuff, and like that's terrible, but like in a controlled environment, you are going to get a more controlled result.
Yep. I was just going to say it would be kind of like, it would make life easy if you could just go, oh, simple things are better, but I don't think that's the case at all.
And I mean, I think it also like really depends on your definition of better.
Yeah.
What is your metric for better? Is it a more intense experience? Is it something that's more safe?
Yeah.
Is it something that's more structured?
And that's going to change depending on what day of the week it is and what you want out of that particular thing on that season. So
exactly.
Okay. Do you have a preferred method of achieving chemognosis, and why do you prefer it over others?
So again, that sort of goes back to, it depends what it is I'm actually wanting to do. So if I'm out at a nightclub, do you remember those?
Yeah. It's been a while.
Yeah, but one day they might happen again. I don't know. Anyway, imagine, if you can, young people, there's a room, it's dark, you're inside, and there are thousands of other people in the same room as you. Whoa.
I'm weeping now.
Oh God, I'm sorry.
Nope.
There are laser lights. It's all kicking off. There's DJ is like pumping out the beats, and it's just amazing. So you want to be on like nice bit of sort of MDMA and a little bit of LSD just to keep things a bit interesting, don't you? That's just your ideal, your candy flip situation. That's what you want there.
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
want to just be sort of like having an occasional sort of like boost of those different things as the evening goes on. So you have a bit of this, bit of that, bit of this, bit of that. So it keeps things sort of like nice. So you're not just like boom and like unable to do anything, but just enough to keep you on this sort of like the trajectory of it is sort of like goes up in a nice sort of steady thing. It keeps you on a plateau, sort of like, oh yeah, I'm really like able to dance, but it's all like really, I'm having strange, lovely thoughts, and everything looks like it's made out of plasticine. Amazing. You're going along like that for a few hours, and then you come down nice and slowly because you've gotten up slowly. So you come down as each dose gradually steps you down afterwards. So you want to be doing a candy flip for that. But if you're sitting in a circle around a fire with people and you want to be like singing and drumming, that's not a good idea. You want to be doing that because then you're just going to be like jiffling around in your seat, wandering off into the shadows, nudging the person next to you when something funny happens and going, ha, ha, ha. It's not going to work out well, is it? So if you're in that situation, you want to be doing some kind of like sort of like a small dose of tryptamine, kind of like cactus, something like that. So you're awake, but not too annoying to everyone else, even yourself, or possibly some kind of, what else could you have? Ayahuasca can work in that sort of situation, or mushrooms can be quite nice at a moderate dose because then you sort of like feel quite sort of relaxed and you're just sort of happy being in your body, and you don't necessarily need to do anything, but you've had enough of the tryptamine type of thing to keep yourself awake and interested in stuff. So it depends on what you're up to.
I feel like that would be a really good instance for using Kratom, to where like you feel more conversational, you feel more lucid and with it, but you have that nice like kind of float going on where you don't feel like you have to, like, it's not like taking a bunch of uppers where you're like, I need to go talk to everybody right now.
Yeah.
It's, you know, and again, that's again goes back to like where set and setting comes into play, of like, what is it you were trying to achieve, and where are you trying to achieve it, and how are you trying to achieve it?
Generally, I prefer the things that are a bit more sort of activating, because by nature I tend to be a bit more, I don't know, quiescent perhaps is the right word. Not withdrawn, but sometimes just a little sort of like thing that just sort of sparks me up a bit can be the thing that I prefer. So I don't tend to go for any of the sort of downers or the opioids or the things like that. I don't tend to drink terribly much anymore these days. And so mostly it's the sort of things that make things a bit more sparkly and a bit more sort of interesting.
In my 20s, I had like a very unhealthy relationship with alcohol. And like one of the things that helped me kind of break that cycle was being able to view alcohol as a utility instead of like just chasing this, like, okay, I want to feel like this forever. And then the next thing you know, you're waking up the next day in a strange apartment and you're not quite sure how you got there, but your lip really hurts.
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah.
You know, being able to view it as a utility where, like, okay, I'm in a situation where I should probably be a little more social. I tend to be very much a wallflower in social gatherings, but, like, you know, having a beer or two can change that. But even still, it's, you know, there's that struggle of, like, okay, I need to have a beer or two and not get to a point where, like, now I'm slurring, I'm being embarrassing. And again, it comes back to being able to view these things as tools instead of just viewing them as, like, this experience.
Yeah. That's an important point that you raised there, that the dosage of the substance is also important. It's not just what you're taking, but it's also how much you're taking. So.
Right, and that gets to fucking Paracelsus, who said it was the dose that made the medicine.
Exactly, yeah.
But what we had just talked about gets it kind of gets into another question that we had was, do you use certain chemicals for certain types of workings, and what are they? So I feel like we kind of answered that one.
Yeah. If I was doing a divination thing, then LSD on its own is quite good for that. If you're doing something that you want to be in a very receptive, present moment kind of thing. So if I was doing a thing where I wanted to find out about a particularly sort of complicated, like I wouldn't use it for doing tarot reading type divination, but if I was doing a more free-form scrying or trying to have an insight into a particularly difficult situation, which I sort of frame myself under the category of divination, then LSD on its own is quite good for that, because you can really get into the thinking about a particular thing, and you need to have something physically present to remind you what the fuck it is you're supposed to be doing, so otherwise you drift off in all directions. But you have some kind of object or sign which represents what it is that you're questing after and what it is you're trying to get to, or like that. And I find that can be incredibly useful.
See, and you mentioned tarot readings. I've noticed personally that alcohol tends to help with tarot readings.
Oh, I totally agree
because
with that.
it completely gets rid of all inhibitions. And so, like, the first thing that comes to mind, that's the first thing that comes out.
Yep, that's really good, because when you're doing tarot readings, as you know, the thing that you do is that you're speaking for the tarot. That's how I conceptualize it. So you just have to open your mouth and it comes out of you. And yeah, having a couple of beers is incredibly helpful for that. When a few years ago with a friend of mine, very good friend of mine, we were the tarot readers at a tattoo convention in the city that we live in. And we were there for 2 days doing tarot readings non-stop for the whole thing. It was really funny. We were like dressed up in sort of gypsy costumes, and we had like wall hangings and like and little sort of like what's the word, throws and different stuff. We had like the table set up with a little plastic skull and roses, and it was all very sort of cheesy. But we were doing tarot readings, just very quick ones for people as they turned up. And she was doing ones for love, and I was doing ones for life, and we were sort of doing different things. And we were really properly getting into the flow of it, because we were just doing really quick 15-minute ones like that. And yeah, having a beer or two just to keep us sort of slightly in that not quite normal state was really helpful for that.
Well, see, what I did when I was a broke college student is I would go to bars with my tarot deck, and I would just trade readings for drinks. And so I would get better as the night went on. And like it worked fantastically. There wasn't a single night that I would go and do that where I wouldn't get absolutely shit-faced, which was my goal in the first place.
Do you think that has anything to do with state-dependent learning?
That's a good question.
It could well do, because a lot of those things are associated with that. So
like one thing that I'd found that's kind of tangentially related to that is learning to play pool.
Oh yeah, I'm great
totally
at pool, like 6 beers down. Any more than that, I'm shit. Any less than that, I'm shit.
2 for me.
I had
it's my ideal spot.
I had learned to play pool, so my sister long ago in the before times, my sister used to, like, when she was a broke post high school kid, she would pay her rent by hustling pool. Like, she would go to pool halls and hustle. She would walk out of there with, you know, a couple $100 a night.
Whoa.
But I mean, she did, like, basically she would go there and she would just, like, fucking rake it in on people of just, like, sucking for, like, the first half hour. And I had asked her about it one time. And I was like, is this like a con? And she's like, sort of, but not really. What I've realized is I'm really good at pool after I smoke a couple joints, because that's how she had learned to play pool.
Okay.
Was like just a little bit, like with a little bit of that like cannabis fuzz going on. So when she got there, it was just like this ability to concentrate and like kind of, it makes me think of the part in The Hangover where Zach Galifianakis is doing all of the math in his head, and you just see all of the like fucking angles and like math formulas around. Like that's where she gets to. She's also the person that can like smoke weed and then do stuff with her day, which I don't understand at all. Like, I don't.
No, I do it and I take a nap. That's what I want to do.
2 episodes of It's Always Sunny and I'm out. That's it. I don't know how she does it. But yeah, that was something that I think was it was just an interesting point that like I thought of when Yara, you were talking about like getting better progressively as you had more to drink.
Yeah.
And there is a sort of, like you say, there's a cutoff point where it's like, now I'm in the zone, now I must stop imbibing and just hold there and just come down again, and that's where it is. But you can't just keep chasing that. It doesn't work, does it?
There's a very fine point. There is, because if you go more than that, you're going to suck. If you go less than that, you're going to equally suck. There's a sweet spot.
Yeah, and it's time limited as well. There's like, you've got an hour. That's it.
Yeah.
I forget whose quote it was. It only takes me 1 drink to get drunk. I just can't remember if it's the 5th or the 6th.
I like that one. I've not heard that one. That's very good.
But your story, Dreadnought, had brought up one of the other questions. Nikki, what are your thoughts on chronic use from Snoop Dogg down?
That's a very good question. Very well phrased indeed. So, yeah, chronic use. It's like, so if you do anything every day, then you kind of stop doing it. It's going to affect you in some different ways, but it's not going to be like, because if you're doing it from like a standing start. So chronic use of things is generally not a terribly good idea, apart from things like breathing and drinking and eating, and even those you can overdo. But the chronic use of things that you're not supposed to put into your body all the time generally doesn't work out well, and it usually doesn't have an effect. Like if you take acid and then the next day you take some more acid, it's not going to have the same effect.
Yeah, it's diminishing.
Physically, your receptors just aren't there to receive it. And I've witnessed people from a bit of a distance and seen them go down horrible sort of paths where they just do the same thing every day, and they think that they're progressing somewhere and they're not. So people who just get stoned all the time and see the secrets of the universe, but you're just like, no, you're just sitting in a room all day long. That's not the secrets of the universe. So yeah, so chronic use can be like, it's implied in the sort of the actual sort of phrase, isn't it, that if something is being used in a chronic sense, then it generally doesn't have good connotations, that word.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, a lot of times I come back to on that is like psychedelics, right? Like there is an amount of psychedelic use that is sustainable, and there are, we've all heard and seen stories and witnessed like people just breaking that threshold, and like people are taking, an amount of mushrooms that is just not sustainable for any reasonable person, experienced or not, right? It's a very easy rabbit hole to fall down because it's fucking fun and it feels really good, and like you can get lost in just, I want to chase this feeling forever.
Yeah, everything is incredibly significant, and therefore you must carry on doing this, and you can get very deluded by that. So
and it's like I've said about a lot of things, like moderation is the key towards everything. Like Buddha had taught with the middle path, like nothing is inherently bad, nothing is inherently good. It's all in how you use it. And so anything involving like chemognosis or whatever, it's just a chemical. It's not bad. It's just how you use it. If you become like dependent upon said chemical, that's where it starts leading into the bad. Otherwise, it's just an inert substance.
One of the biggest examples of that in my mind, nicotine, right? If you are not a smoker and you smoke a cigarette, like you're going to get a nicotine buzz. And in my opinion, like a nicotine buzz is one of the cleanest highs you can get because you're focused, you're there. It lasts for about 10 minutes. So like you don't have to block your day out around like, I'm doing this thing now. It's there, right? But it's also If you smoke a cigarette, you're going to get that. If you start smoking 2 or 3 cigarettes, it's gone. And now you're just breaking even because your body has stopped producing nicotine.
All you're doing is that when you're not having a cigarette, you're becoming withdrawn from it. That's the only thing that you're noticing.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the bellwethers. And a lot of people, you know, like a lot of people don't consider that, like when there's such a weird, you know, conversation about addiction, especially in America, where like people don't really consider what physical addiction or chemical addiction actually is.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to cigarettes, like the thing that's really hard to quit is not the physical addiction. That takes about 72 hours and your body will start producing nicotine again. It's that your brain gets so hooked on that feeling that you are like 10 years after you've quit smoking, something stressful happens and you're reaching in your coat pocket for your cigarettes.
Yeah. And it's that behavioral cue as well, isn't it? Like the sort of state dependent thing that you were talking about before. So I know that for me, when I was smoking tobacco, which I've done on and off on a sort of frequency, I would smoke for a bit and then not for some years, and then but at the moment I'm not, and I probably won't now because I'm over 50, so it's not a good time to carry on smoking at this point. You have to just go, no, my heart can't take it anymore. So for me, a lot of the attraction of smoking cigarettes is the sort of the paraphernalia and the physical doing the thing, the sort of the comfort bit of it.
Yeah.
There's just that sort of the movement of the hands and doing that whole thing. So that aspect of it was for me very important. So things like nicotine gum totally didn't work because that just gave me the chemical, and that wasn't what I was addicted to.
Right, and that's quite kind of like I quit smoking a few years ago, but I use a vaporizer, and it wasn't so much like the nicotine that I wanted out of it. The reason why a vaporizer actually helped me quit, as opposed to like nicotine gum or patches or anything like that, was because what I was missing from it was the sense of having my lungs filled.
Yeah.
That is what I was searching for, which I could get out of a vaporizer. I couldn't get that out of a gum. I couldn't get that out of a patch. It was that feeling of like inhaling something and having my lungs filled.
Yep. I quite like the definition of addiction as being a thing that the use of a substance then becomes problematic and interferes with other things in your life. So which could be a health thing, or it could be a social thing, or an economic thing, or whatever.
Well,
but the fact that whatever it is that you're taking is in some way becoming bad for your normal functioning.
Well, and that kind of falls within because we had an episode about like neurodivergence and shit like that, and it's kind of along the same line. So like I have very severe ADHD, but I hear from people all the time, oh, I'm absent-minded too, I'll forget my keys. There's a difference between like forgetting something and it impacting your life to a degree where you're losing jobs and not able to like hold on to social relationships because it's interfering. It falls within a spectrum.
Yeah, and that gets into very much like what would outside of like, you know, what would colloquially be like mental addiction, right? That's where you get the people that are like, well, anything can be addictive. And you get things like people that have things like gaming disorder, right? Like, you know, as somebody who like, I play a lot of video games. It's what I do instead of watching TV, right? But it doesn't impact my life to a point where like, I'm not taking care of things around the house. I'm not, you know, it doesn't do that. And I had this, you know, because there was a time, especially in my 20s, where that's all I did, right? And like thinking about it in a sense of like, okay, there are a lot of people in their 20s, all they did was watch TV. It's kind of the same thing. But like, you know, I had to sit there and like educate myself on like, okay, these are kind of the milestones to look out for. Am I like shirking social responsibilities? Am I like calling off of work? Am I like ignoring, you know, engagements and dates to go like hang out with my friends outside of this like world that is in front of me on a screen? And, you know, those things weren't happening. So it helped me feel a little comfortable, but it also like doing that research kind of really opened my eyes into like, you know, there are a lot of things that are considered like, you know, socially acceptable that like are like that fuck with people in that way, right? And, you know, I think there's absolutely a conversation to be had about that. but there also is, to kind of tie it back in, like there's a conversation that isn't had about things that are actually like physically addictive, right?
Yeah, like sugar.
Or like a good example is like alcohol, right? If you are physically dependent on alcohol, it's not a matter of willpower. Like, it's not a matter of like, oh, well, you just don't drink. Like, okay, if you don't do that,
that'll kill you.
Yeah, you will die.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a physiological thing, isn't it? So, yeah.
And then like past that certain point, then yeah, it is a matter of like being able to retrain your brain, but that's fucking hard because like your neural pathways have been remapped at that point.
Okay, getting back to Chemognosis and magic. Nikki, what chemical gnosis do you use with Baphomet that is different from other spirits or gods? And are there certain actions, such as gestures or chants, that make Chemognosis more effective?
So, yes. Let me just see. I made a bit of a note thing about this. Yeah. So, yeah, my experience with Baphomet is very different to other gods because for me, Baphomet is the sort of the collective, everything that's alive on the planet is the sort of the material basis of Baphomet. So if you're in a chemognostic kind of state, then you're going to be able to see, as long as you're not in some kind of like sterile box, you're going to be able to see some other kind of living thing. So you've got like a real part of, and yourself as well, you've got a real part of Baphomet there. So especially if you're out in a nice woodland area or something like that, you're actually within the world of Baphomet completely. So it's a very different kind of experience, especially when you're in that heightened awareness and really sensitive to things, and everything is like much loud. So any kind of calls of animals or birds comes across as like an important, significant message to you that you can interpret, things like that. And yeah, I use anchored mudras, hand gestures, and also different chants, which I associate with different things, like the sort of the idea of state dependent learning. So you anchor different states of consciousness to different mudras is a really nice little trick to have. I've got one gesture which I found while I was in a chemognostic state, and I associate it with void consciousness. So if I'm ever feeling it's all like too much, I do the particular gesture that I have, which is just one that I found for myself. So it's just a thing that you find for yourself. And I found that gesture, and if I do that, then I can feel myself connecting with that state of just like calm nothingness. So it can pull that up for me. So the experience with Baphomet that I've had, one of the, slightly going back to one of the earlier questions about particular substances with particular things. So I associate 5-MeO with Baphomet consciousness, because 5-MeO DMT is something that's very sort of kinesthetic for me. It's a very sort of physical kind of high. So it's much more to do with being incredibly aware rather than of my surroundings. It's being incredibly aware of my internal sensations, my interoceptive abilities, the sort of the sensation of my heart beating, of the blood rushing through my veins, of the state of the muscles that I have, the proprioception sort of thing going on. What's my skeleton doing, and all of those kind of things, because your skeleton has actually got like sensory things in it, so it feeds back whether you've got tension on your arms and things. So all of your interoceptive abilities are really heightened by the 5-MeO experience for myself, and I've talked about it with other people, and it seems to be the same. And for me, that very intense sensation of living and being, I associate that quite strongly with invocations of Baphomet.
That's really interesting. I've always kind of interpreted Baphomet as the deification of the collective self.
Mm-hmm.
So like, any substance that's going to help you get in touch with yourself
Mm-hmm.
and such is going to kind of like, track with that kind of, deity working. I had kind of a tangential question about that, where you had talked about all of these things that seem like significant experiences and things that seem, like everything is significant and I must chase and I must, gather and collect. Do you have any tips or any advice for people as far as like documenting this, as far as like being able to, okay, we can all eat a fucking 10 strip and be like, I am external, and then like wake up in the morning and just need water, right? But how do you differentiate, like, and how do you document and interpret things that are the things that are actually significant, or think not that they're actually significant or insignificant, but like the things that are applicable.
Yeah, because one thing that we've constantly pushed on our listeners and on our Discord server and on Facebook, whatever, is as a magician, you have to fucking journal. If you're not journaling, you're just having a good time. If you like journaling, you're actually being a magician, and writing down cause and effect.
I've always maintained, and I'll say it until I'm blue in the face, the only real magical tool is your journal. Everything else is a prop.
Yep. That's a very good thing to have. Okay, hold that big question there. I'll just go slightly back to the DMT thing with Baphomet. So one of the things about being incredibly aware of your internal physical self is that that's quite general to all of the things on the planet, but particularly other humans, obviously. But so it makes me feel identified with the feeling of being a human and sort of a biological moving set of tubes, rather than what I look like from the outside, or what my voice sounds like, or what I'm thinking in my head. So in that regard, I feel like I'm really tuning into that collective self thing that you referred to there. So it's like that's one of the things that happens from it. And one of the other things that happens on that is that we found that singing, sort of free form singing, not as in like knowing words to a song, but just where you like vocalize different vowel sounds and make either sort of like lovely noises or strange, bizarre noises, or a combination of the both. That can be incredibly lovely to do on DMT, and just playing with the sounds that come out of your mouth when you're doing different speech sounds, and playing with vowels and consonant noises and seeing how that makes you feel emotionally. That can be an interesting thing to play with. Anyway, so going on to that more complicated question about that. So the way that I look at it as I'm approaching a trip, like there it is in the distance, and I know I'm going to do it on like Tuesday night, whenever it is I've sorted out the time to do it. So I'm heading towards it. And as I go towards it, I know the kind of thing that is I'm going to be looking for. So I bring sort of things into the environment that I'm going to be in. If it's going to be my it's going to be like a room that I'm in or whatever, so I'll bring objects, and some of them things will be things that I found on my sort of like journeys around the world. So they might be something that I found in a thrift store, or it might be something that I found on the ground as I've been walking around. It might be a lovely flower that I found somewhere, or just like a piece of wood that looks significant. And all these things are sort of like bring together, and they'll sort of like coalesce with this sort of idea of whatever it is I'm searching for. So I'll bring these random objects, or apparently random objects, together. And one of the keys about being a good magician is being able to tell that difference between the apophenia of the world and the pareidolia of the world. So I don't know how familiar people that are listening to this are with those two particular things. They're psychological terms, which are to do with finding patterns in stuff.
Yeah, the human mind's very good at finding patterns in things.
Very good. That's one of the things that we're particularly brilliant at, and lots of other animals as well. So pareidolia is the finding of patterns in stuff. Like, so you look at a piece of wood, and you see in the wood grain, you might see a lovely sort of like picture of like a beautiful lady or something with a like lovely flowing dress on or something. But apophenia is, in a magical sense, and also in the sort of the more psychological thing, is finding significant patterns in things. So it's about knowing the difference between the random stuff that just comes up and goes, it's a fish, or the thing that is to do with what your question is. And the difference between those things can be quite tricky to do. Some of it is just practice, I think, and knowing what it is that you're trying to look for, and also noting things down and then questioning them subsequently as well. So you might go, oh, this seems very significant at the moment, and that's where the journaling thing can be very good. So you can write down or make a note of things or draw a little picture. Sometimes that's easier than writing when you're in a Gnosticated state. And then afterwards you can look back at it and go, yeah, but what does that actually mean? And I'm always quite happy with the idea of that after I've done a trip, when I come back from it, that it's like diving into a pool of different things and finding like there was all these sort of different treasures scattered around, and coming back with maybe even just one thing from that's a significant, rather than trying to remember all of the different things, but going, yeah, this one has something that's really touches me, and that I really feel strongly is something that I need to take back and remember. So I'd make a note of that, or somehow record it physically so that it's not just in my head. So I've made a note so I can then bring that back, or bring it back via a sort of particular train of thought, so that then in the aftermath of the trip, then you can look back and go, right, so this is what I've brought back, this idea or this new concept or this thing that I need to go, this is the key to then moving this forward in the world.
That makes me think of a Doug Stanhope bit where he's talking about his process for creating stand-up comedy. And basically the bit boils down to psychedelics gave me the perspective I needed to find humor in things. Nicotine gave me the patience to sit and write it down. And alcohol gave me the confidence to stand up here in front of you fuckers and say it.
He's a genius, that man. He really is. I love him. Yeah, that's pretty good.
But yeah, I think one of the things that people kind of there's a misconception about, chemognosis in general, where like people think that chemognosis can serve as an adequate replacement to like mental training, right?
Yeah. That's not true at all, is it? So,
no, I think that like one of the biggest things that can help with being able to find, like talking about like apophenia and finding like the significance in it is training your mind and being able to raise your awareness to those things in a mundane sense. The reality is there are very few substances, at least that I've, come into contact with. There are very few substances that will completely dissociate your mind, right? You will still be able to kind of recognize things and be able to be conscious in that moment. And you will be able to kind of, again, recognize those patterns. And by, doing meditation, training yourself to be able to be aware of the world around you and, the things that are going on and observant without necessarily ascribing a specific meaning to it in that moment. You will find that is something that helps you when and if you decide that you want to experiment with chemognosis.
Absolutely. Well, it's just that preparation is incredibly important, so that you've got that ability to, if you find yourself running off with a train of thought and it's leading you somewhere that you're not particularly happy with, you need to know that to get out of that, then you need to know what it is that you can do to your organism to stop that happening, whether you just like get up and move to a different part of the world, or whether you have a particular hand gesture, like I was saying earlier on, which you associate with, I will now stop thinking about things, and then you can start thinking about something else. Being able to press that pause button is essential to have that ability, and you can't gain that in the middle of all that maelstrom, not very easily. So it's much easier to practice it in advance. Like if you're going to be tripping and you want to be doing some yoga or body work, you don't learn it during the time that you're tripping. You learn it 2 years earlier, and then you practice it for 2 years, and then when you get to the thing, then like that.
Yeah, it's like doing a dry run.
This reminds me, one thing, when it's come to our show and everything, we've taught like new magicians and new practitioners and things like, okay, so getting into it, you need to practice some of the harder things when it comes to magic. So like things like meditation, things like object and sound concentration, things like that. And the reason why is because those are the harder concepts. You have to have those harder concepts down before you can move on to easier things and be comfortable with those. So one thing that I would like to point out is amongst a lot of magicians, especially when it comes to chemognosis, this can be a crutch.
Yes.
Where it's like, okay, I can achieve gnosis if I just eat this. As opposed to, actually putting forth the work in order to become good at what you do as a magician. You don't just rely entirely, like all of your practice on one substance or a group of substances.
So one thing that I've kind of, viewed that through, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, Nikki. Using chemognosis is something that's very easy to get there, but it can be wildly inconsistent. Whereas using something like, excitatory gnosis of dancing or meditation, using like more quote unquote traditional forms of, achieving gnosis, which that's a whole bag of cats to unwrap that I kind of just opened up, but like using more conventional, I guess I'll say, terms is harder to achieve, but it's a lot more consistent. And I think that as a magician in your practice, consistency is something you should be aiming for. Whereas like you need to be able to have that kind of consistency in it, because like you're not always going to be able to have access to, you know, whatever chemical it is you're using. What comes to mind for me is the silo raid in Kansas in like the 90s or early 2000s or whatever, where the guy that was making a bunch of acid got fucking busted, and then there was just no acid, right? Like if your entire practice is developed around having access to this thing and now it's gone, you're fucked.
Yeah. It can be viewed as like an enhancing extra tool thing, but you shouldn't be dependent upon it, because at that point it verges into that territory of addiction that we were talking upon earlier on. So it becomes something that if you're dependent upon, oh, I must have this particular crystal in order to access that, then it's not you doing it anymore. It's you're relying on that. You're giving your power to the substance rather than you doing it yourself, and then the substance is the sort of just like helping you along with that. So with the Baphomet thing and 5-MeO-DMT, while I associate that with that, I've done hundreds of hours of doing things with Baphomet and only like maybe half a dozen experiences of using 5-MeO-DMT with Baphomet. So although that's something that I associate with that, it's not by any means the majority of my practice with that particular deity.
This kind of segues really well into the next question, which is, what do you find the easiest to control in terms of substance, and what is a readily available substance, excluding liquor, pot, or other drugs, that you find has a profound effect? And they are asking for the quote sober loser witches like them.
Oh, you shouldn't equate sober with losers at all. They're completely different states of existence. So I know they're doing it in a slightly sort of self-deprecating humor kind of way, but you know, dude, just like be nice to yourself. You're allowed to be sober. I'm sober like the vast majority of my life. So especially as I become like older and more mature, but there's been loads of periods in the past where I've not had any kind of psychoactives for more than a year. You know, it's just what happens. And that can lead to its own state of blissful awareness. You alluded earlier on, Dreadnought, to the way that breath work can make you really tripped out. So that's something that I'd recommend to this person. Try doing breath work, connected breath work. It's very easy to do. You're really in control of it, because as soon as you start to lose control of it, you stop being able to breathe in the way that's making you be in that state. So it has its own safety mechanism built into it. So yeah, so something like that would be good. That is a substance in a similar way, because you're just self-generating it rather than imbibing it from the outside in. So by doing the over breathing for a period of time, then that can be an incredibly psychedelic experience.
Right, but I like getting back to what you had said, like you don't have to equate like the substance use with being like good at what you're doing, because like it's traditionally held like people who practice magic or something, especially with the whole like neo-shamanistic movement, where you imbibe a substance and that's what makes you magical. It's very important to know that that's not what it is.
No. And drumming is another very good one. So that regular fast drum beat, I haven't got anything that I can do that with on to hand, but if you've got like a hand drum and you just like boom 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 boom, that speed of a rhythm, just like that, really simple heartbeat rhythm, or not even heartbeat rhythm, is just like really fast like that, like the Native American church style drum.
Yeah.
Do that for 15 or 20 minutes, and during that 15 or 20 minutes you can drift off to all sorts of amazing different states of awareness. And if you're unable to do that for yourself, and it's a good, you can record that and then play it back to yourself, so you don't even need a recording from somebody else. I quite like, you can have, obviously there are pre-recorded things of this out there in the world, but it's nice to play for yourself. It really is. It gives you that sense of that you're guiding yourself as well. I really approve of making your own tools and making your own things as far as you're able to. There's a bit of a cottagecore vibe going on, I think, possibly. So record a drum beat for just 15-20 minutes. It doesn't matter if it's like not perfect at all, and remember to do the return bit at the end where you speed up lots really quickly for the last sort of like half a minute or so. And just so record that on whatever thing you've got to hand, your phone, whatever, and then play that back to yourself while you're just lying down with your eyes closed, and you will go places. It's a really good way of shamanic journeying. and that's a really good thing to do, and that sort of brings into the frame here. So you're calling, I'm referring to these substances, but it's like an internally generated substance in those cases, but it's prompted by the repeated thing. So like for instance, if you tap on a muscle, if you tap on it more than about 40 or 50 times, then the chemicals within the muscle will make it relax. It's completely like a physiological effect. And it's the same with the hearing of a drum beat, or the breath work thing that changes your body chemistry. So it is a substance, and it's like, so when you're imbibing psilocybin has no effect on you at all. It's when the body changes it into psilocin, then that has the effect. So that's also, it's not like even a direct effect of it's all sorts of like, it's all very fuzzy, isn't it? The boundaries between us and the outside, and it calls into interesting questions, you know, what is me and what is the world, which I quite like exploring philosophically. But yeah, so doing those kind of things is what I would recommend to this person. And as I was saying earlier on, my most often and most deeply magical sacrament is now water, and has been for many years.
So to kind of build on that answer, and this it depends on, like, for the person who asked, it depends on the extent to which you are able. But one of the strongest substances in existence is produced by your body, dopamine.
Mm-hmm.
Find a way to, like, encourage your body to produce dopamine. One of the best ways to do that, exercise. Like, the term runner's high exists for a reason. Find something like, you know, and again, you know, if to the extent that you are able to, find a way like to release that kind of like dopamine and get that positive feedback coming in. There are obviously like really detrimental ways of doing that, but like if you find a way to kind of induce that kind of state where your body is like getting those dopamine hits, it's going to affect how your brain works, because dopamine is the thing that makes us feel good.
Yeah.
Well, and it's not just that. Like, there are plenty of other supplements that you can take that we in our modern diets have been completely neglectful of. Things like omega-3 fatty acids are amazing for the brain. Magnesium is fantastic. I love magnesium. That is amazing. Vitamin D.
It massively changed my whole life when I started to have magnesium. I used magnesium gel, and it's just like, whoa, my thinking became so much clearer after like a couple of months. My memory started to work. It was quite odd.
Yeah. It's weird.
Yeah.
Like that, there's vitamin D, because you can't overdose on vitamin D. Just take a shitload of it. You'll be amazed at the effects that it will produce.
5-HTP.
B12 as well.
Yeah, 5-HTP, B12. Like these are all like supplements that you can take that will increase your productivity and all sorts of shit in relation to not only your mundane life, but your magical life as well.
Yep. Like you were saying, the journal is your important tool, but your body is also a very important tool. And a magician that neglects their body, that is going to be, you're giving yourself a handicap straight away there by not looking after yourself. And I know that there are reasons for why people aren't able to be like 100% healthy. I'm not. I've got arthritis and I've got like a dodgy inner ear and things. And it's not about being in perfect health. It's about looking after yourself to the best capacity that you have, so that you can increase your ability to be able to function properly. I've had chronic pain now for over 10 years with the problem that I've got with my ear, but you learn different ways of sort of like going with that and trying to improve the situation that you're in. And I'm increasingly I haven't actually been properly judged, but I'm pretty sure that I've got Asperger's syndrome as well. I fit all of the different criteria on that. So the whole neurodivergent thing. So I'm definitely in the whole favor of not going, one has to be like in a sort of total athletic state of fitness. It's not that sort of like righteous kind of preachy kind of health thing.
No, and
saying that
as
people
far
should
as
look after themselves, have enough sleep as far as you can, eat as much good food and clean water, and just look after yourself as if you were someone else.
Right. And as far as like neurodivergence, I've always said there is no perfectly normal person. Everyone falls on a spectrum.
Yeah,
and
we all have our place in the world as well. So
right, absolutely.
I think it comes down to, the same as anything else. Like, the best magic is the magic you do, right? Like, you can sit there and read about whatever and then not do it, and that doesn't really count. It's the same thing with health, right? Like, the best things you can do are the things you actually do, right?
Yeah.
I've similarly, not to a certain extent, like, I've got bad knees, I've got, my back is shot, my shoulders aren't really what they used to be. Like, it's finding things you can do, right? Even just like going for a walk, like, or just like kind of monitoring and like changing up your diet. I've gone in the last year or so, like, I've gone from eating pretty much nothing but like burgers and fast food and like high octane garbage to like living in a situation where I have actual food with actual nutrients and like, taking care of my body more. And even that, I've just noticed such a huge change in, cognitive ability and, having it feel like my brain and my body are starting to get on the same page with stuff. And that alone is massively useful. And it's not because I've been, holding myself to this standard of like, I've got to be the like peak performance fucking, everybody has to look like Terry Crews. Like, no.
You will never be peak performance anything.
That's not true. I will be peak neat performance. You watch me.
But, all right, fair enough.
But like it comes from accepting that, like, okay, this is the body that I have. This is what I have. And that's really what, like, to go off on another tangent, the idea of like body acceptance is not about like saying I'm okay with blah, blah, blah. Like, no, it's about accepting like, this is what I have to work with. These are the cards I've been dealt. How can I make this work for me instead of being stuck in this situation?
I have a shit knee. How do I work around it rather than saying I have a shit knee, I can't do it?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. A friend of mine who's a very good magician said to me when I was like in like huge pain with my head, which is now thankfully lapsed, but for several years I had a terrible headache and pain. And he was like, so hold your arms out in front of you, like sort of to measure, like there's your awareness, sort of hold your hands as far apart as they can be. Now, how much of that space is the pain in your ear? And I was like, oh, about that much, and sort of cut off about maybe a quarter of it. And he was like, so focus on the rest of what's there. Don't focus on that bit there. It's still there and it's still rubbish, but focus on the other part of your life and your other part of your awareness, which is not the pain. And that was like a really important, very small, very easy exercise to do, but it really
that's a really good way of visualizing.
Yeah,
that's a really good way of visualizing and just taking things and seeing like, your perspective, like how things are like, okay, like what's the rest of my existence versus me having some back pain? Well, like, that's a very good way of looking at it.
Yeah. And going back to some of the sort of sometimes when I've been in various different psychedelic states, which are all basically very similar to each other when it comes down to it, with differences. But one of the things that I find is because I practice this sort of interoceptive abilities, which are very good for all sorts of reasons, like getting to know what's going on inside you is really lovely thing to do, and sort of being able to sense your heartbeat, all different things like that. It makes you much more empathic with people, apparently. So that's quite a useful thing if you're a magician and you want to be part of the more sort of collective awareness of the world, which I think is where things are pointing us towards at the moment, rather than just being stuck in individual consciousness. Anyway, I digress. So one of the things that happens is that I've found myself really aware of how I'm sitting or how I'm moving. So I'll be like deep in sort of like a psychedelic trip and be sort of like lost in the visuals or the whatever is going on. And then I'll suddenly go, why am I sitting like this? This is just crazy. I need to be like, I should be like more, uncross my legs, sit like more upright, make my spine a bit less sort of like tense about things, like shrug my shoulders a few times. It's like, so that's what I should be doing. And because I've done that in this very deep state of awareness, that lesson, that medium-sized idea of like, oh, so this is the insight into what things are making me feel awkward in my normal life, and then carrying that back into normal consciousness afterwards, and realizing that I should do something about that. Maybe I should start going to Tai Chi lessons every week. And I've been doing that for a few years now. So those kind of things are really important little insights into like your own physical being, and those are the things that you can then work with and try and improve the state that you've got to some extent, even if it's not towards some kind of strange theoretical perfection, but just to
with
doing those things
psychedelics
is important, isn't it? So
yeah, I mean, with psychedelics, there's a lot of insight that can come to it at all different points of a trip, where like either towards the beginning, towards the end, or maybe some point in the middle where you'll just have a realization about, hey, maybe I should be doing this instead. And like you can have this whole point where I might feel better about life if I just stop following the Discordian path of just chugging hot dogs all day. Like that might be a good thing.
Yeah.
I feel like kind of going back to what had started this with the idea of visualizing how much of your experience is your pain. The flip side of that coin is like not completely ignoring that pain, though, right? Because that's your body trying to tell you something.
It's still there. You need to maintain that. It's just so you have to be aware that it's still there, but it's like you've still got all this other bit as well. And it was like, oh yeah, I have as well. That's the important part of that.
It's just kind of a focus on priorities, really. Where instead of like, just like, oh well, my life's shit because of this little tiny bit. Where you could see like, no, actually, there's all of this bit that's still pretty fucking good.
Yeah, there's all the rest. There's lots of my body that's not in pain. Oh yeah, I'd forgotten about that because it's not. Obviously, if it's not in pain, it's not saying anything to me particularly in a sort of shouty way. So
it's kind of like when you get sick, and like it's at that point where you realize you've taken for granted all of those times you could breathe out of your nose.
Yeah. So one of the things that's very fashionable at the moment is the idea that past traumas continue on in you in a very embodied kind of way. So the idea it's sort of like to do with all sorts of like body locks and all different. There's various models that explain what it is, but the basic idea is that the trauma in the past affects how you hold yourself and how you are in the world. So you might be slightly sort of hunched over in a sort of like defensive kind of way, and if you're doing that, you're not breathing properly. The muscles are at a bit of a strain all the time. So changing that posture will then allow you to confront different other things in your life much more easily, and the echo of the trauma can start to be dealt with. It's a really powerful way of looking at things, and for me, a lot of the ways that psychedelics make you aware of yourself really go into that side of things. So they will make you suddenly realize that you're holding yourself in a particular way, and you're going, so why am I doing that? And because of the way that they help, that allows connections of thoughts and memories and flavors of things to come back, you can go, oh, it's to do with that particular incident. When I fell off a bicycle and hurt myself, so I'm still bracing for that fall. So I've still got the muscles in my back are still tense from when I just like nearly sort of like that tree. So you just like, oh, and then you start to feel your way into. So what would it be like if I didn't have that tenseness anymore? Because it's okay, body, I'm not falling into that tree at the moment. I'm just sitting here, and you can sort of move around. I'm a big fan of doing dancing, even if it's just like quite sort of like free form, just moving your arms in an uncensored kind of way and legs, and just sort of feeling into the different spaces that your body can fill when you're in that state. Because it's, for me, that's the gestures that I use is to do those sort of dance moves, which is because I spent far too much time in nightclubs and festivals and psytrance, different things over many decades in the before times. So for me, that's the thing that I really like. I like moving meditation. I prefer doing Tai Chi to sitting meditation personally.
You bring up something that we've talked about before, which is the whole concept of like quote unquote shadow work, where you're just like understanding the structure of your own self. And okay, so I feel this way about a certain thing. Well, why do I feel that way? Well, because this thing happened in my life. Okay, well, how can I change that? And that kind of still stems back to the whole theatrics of magic, where you present yourself in a certain way and in different situations, and it's up to you as a magician to determine how you want to present yourself.
Yeah. And that presenting is also to yourself, isn't it? It's
Yes,
what you present
very
to
much
yourself
so.
as well as to the world around you, whether there's people around in it or not. But it's how you present to yourself as much as that.
There's a couple of really interesting like sociological concepts that makes me think of, right? The first one, and I don't know any of the names because I haven't been in any kind of like sociological setting in almost a decade at this point, but the first concept is the idea that everybody is a player on the world stage, basically, right? Which is to say, it goes into the idea of theatricality of magic and just kind of extrapolating that to your everyday life. You are always playing a role, whether you're at work, with your friends, at home by yourself, whatever it is you're doing, you're kind of always playing this role. So that nobody truly knows like that real true inner self, because you're always playing this role. And that it ties into I believe the other concept is from Cooley, and the idea is that like I am not as I see me, and I am not as you see me. I am as I perceive you seeing me, which is to say that like if you treat me like I'm a villain and I perceive you to treat me that way, I'm going to start acting like a villain. And that again goes into kind of by being able to recognize kind of your like psychological mechanics, I guess, for lack of a better term, and recognizing like, okay, well, why do I act this way? Why do I always yell about things that irritate me? Why do I always kind of blow a gasket over little things? You can look at it from that perspective of, well, I'm doing that because there's an expectation of me to do that. Well, where's that expectation coming from? Well, everybody's seen me do this. Okay, but why have they seen you do it? Because you think that you need to do that.
Yeah, and you're sort of creating a very unhelpful feedback loop then, aren't you? So that's where the things like object concentration and sound concentration end up being incredibly powerful, because then you can start applying that to yourself and to your own behaviors, and you can step back slightly from those things and look at them and just observe them. And that separating and observing is the first stage to being able to change what those things are, if you decide that that's what the proper thing is that you want to achieve.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the next question we have is, have you found morning glory seeds to be worth it for the LSA content?
No, absolutely not. I've not done them myself. I've only witnessed other people doing taking LSA, taking morning glory seeds. But apart from the fact that they're quite often coated with something that makes you sick, because someone thought that would be a good thing to do. But having watched other people using morning glory seeds, they haven't turned out to be particularly psychedelic for them. They've made them sort of giggly, then a bit morose, and that's been pretty much the limit of it. So
that was kind of my experience with Amanita Muscaria.
Yeah, that's much more like being drunk, Amanita.
Yeah,
it's not psychedelic. It's not psychedelic at all.
No, it was a very heavy
body.
Feeling.
Very body.
It was just a very heavy, like I need to lay down and just.
Yep.
I felt like sinking into the floor, and it's like, okay, that's all that's going to happen. Okay, that was a waste of time.
Yeah.
That's how I felt with diphenhydramine.
Yeah, diphenhydramine. That's not fun.
No.
Don't do that.
No, I had thought that it would enhance a certain working I was trying to do. Turns out it just shot my short-term memory in the face, and then like all I could do was just kind of sit there and feel really shithoused, and then I just went to bed. Like it didn't do anything.
Yeah, it's important to point out to our listeners that there are many sources online, like particularly the Erowid vaults and Psychonaut Wikipedia and various other sort of like online places where you can go and look up effects of substances before you try them, friends.
Yes. No, absolutely.
And also how they may interact with each other, etc.
Yes,
etc.
that is one thing that I've found extremely helpful throughout my psychonautic experience, is also understanding what dosages are and realizing, like, weighing yourself and realizing how many like milligrams per kilogram of a substance you are going to take,
Yes.
And because otherwise you can completely fuck yourself.
And again, it goes back to what Paracelsus said, where the dose makes the medicine. If you're just trying to go like 0 to 100 all the time, that's going to be the experience you have. You're not going to get the nuance of things like microdosing. You're not going to understand the benefits of something like that if all you're doing is like, I'm gonna have 7 grams of mushrooms. Like, you're not
fucking hero dose every time.
Yeah,
I was very surprised. I was well into my 20s when I've discovered this fact that you could actually not take loads.
Yeah, it
was a
that just
complete
reminds
revelation.
me.
It was just like, whoa.
No, that just reminds me of like some college binge drinker who's like, wait, you mean people can just sit there and have a beer for dinner? You don't have to like fucking pound a keg?
Yeah, exactly.
That was my experience with alcohol in my early 20s. Was like just because I was
all or nothing.
I was drinking for the feeling, right? And I just wanted to feel like that forever. It took me understanding the utility of alcohol before I was like, oh, I can have like 2 beers and be good to go, and like be ready to go to like a gathering or a house party or something that I otherwise wouldn't want to be at. I can get to just a level where I feel like talking to people and I feel like interacting. And then like you have those 2 beers and then you just maintain. When you start to feel it dipping, you have another one and like you're fine.
I'm not going to feel the need to do a keg stand at a Mary Kay gathering.
I mean, not feel the need. But I guarantee you, if you go to a Mary Kay gathering and do a keg stand, no one is going to try and sell you shit.
That's very true.
Results.
And then the last question we have, which is
kind of a doozy.
What do you think about the planetary correspondences of plants and fungi currently being explored, especially with psychedelic medicinal mushrooms, as well as more generally? And also regarding either harvesting or growing psilocybins or cannabis, do you find much of a crossover between sort of animist perspectives, genus loci, bioregional perspectives on taking and offerings and things like that, in terms of the experiences that you have with plant matter, I guess? I hope that isn't incoherent.
It was, but we'll answer it anyway.
Go ahead, take your time, read over that question and parse it as you will.
I'm quite glad I've got it written down here in front of me.
Yeah. There is one other question that we had that we can get to at the end, but that's kind of neither here nor there. But go for this one.
Okay, so I'm going to go not in the order that it was asked. I'm going to say that the whole sort of bioregional perspective on things is something that's very interesting. So you've got various psilocybe mushrooms that grow across the world in all the different continents. Science, up until fairly recently, was only aware of the ones in Mexico because that's where they were looking for them. So the ones in Africa and the ones in Australia and the ones in different parts of Europe and Asia have only just recently started to come to light as people have gone, hang on a minute, those are also psilocybe mushrooms, aren't they? But if you look at a map of like the world, this is something that the lovely Darren Springer often brings up in his talks. He puts like a slide up of the world, and it's like the papers that have been written on various psychedelic mushroom species. Where have these psychedelic mushroom species been found? And there's this huge blob in Mexico where there's all these like these little dots. Nothing in Africa at all, hardly, and then a few scattered in the rest of the world. And of course, that doesn't represent what's really out there in the world. That represents what people have looked for and found in the world. And the different perspectives on what the mushroom spirit and what the psilocybin does is very different in those different sort of cultures across the world, which are only starting to come to light with. So the whole idea of genius loci and stuff is something that I really, really like. I like the idea that there's different sort of fairies or spirits or whichever word you want to use that you're happiest with to fit to these things. But the different the intelligences of a place, whether that's a tree by a stream or a city or whatever scale that you're looking at, those things have an identity that you can contact and work with. And if you're using things that have grown in that area, then they're going to clue you into it much more than something that's come from across the sea. So I'm a big advocate for using things that are from the area that you're from, rather than dragging things thousands of miles away. So in that regard, the sort of the animist perspective is something as well. So I've been lucky enough to take and to meet ayahuasca spirits before now, which I've spoken of in other things, and this is like some years ago. And I deliberately went into this particular ayahuasca meeting with the intention of meeting the spirit of ayahuasca. That's what I wanted to do, so that I could have a conversation with it. And I very much framed it in those terms. And I met these little like animated cartoon mice. That was how they appeared to me in this thing, like Speedy Gonzales, if you're familiar with that from back in the day. And so there were these two like little mice characters, and they were talking to me and telling me things and showing me this sort of like video of vines growing up skyscrapers and how the jungle was going to reclaim it and the plants were going to reclaim their place in the middle of cities. And it was really like lovely. And that was the interaction that I had with these things, and that was very much the two spirits of the ayahuasca, which is made out of the two different plants, Banisterius, and so that was how those two spirits came to me and talked with me, and that was a really amazingly powerful experience for me. So that was something that was good. I think that different region, and I think it had represented it because in my head, South America was deeply tied up with this idea of Speedy Gonzales, the sort of the in my child brain, Mexico was South America,
right?
As much as anything else was.
Like as a child, you don't really differentiate between South and Central America.
Much of a thing. So in my head, those things become conflated, and that was how the guise that the spirits put on in order to reach that part of me that was deeply in love with that kind of thing, and the way that it's very trickstery character, isn't it? Speedy Gonzales in the things, he tricks the mouse all the time. It's very very sort of chaos magic-y kind of Loki kind of energy to Speedy Gonzales. So I really liked the way that the ayahuasca had decided to tap into that part of myself to say this is the way that we're coming to your world. So I do think that the plants and spirits and the mushrooms have these different things. With the planetary correspondences, that's something that is not quite so easy for me to comment on, because although in the past I have done astrology and I do know a bit about planets and different houses and the signs and so forth, I'm not so sure about this particular aspect of plants and fungi. I think if planetary correspondences work for you in other things, then they'll work for you in conjunction with the plants and fungi stuff. A lot of the correspondence kind of view of magic and different things in the world, I think some of those are slightly sort of not they're a bit Procrustean, you know, the one where the myth of the Procrustean thing, where there's a guy in mythology and people come to his house to stay in the bed, and the idea is that whoever it is that comes to stay in his bed, they're exactly the right size for the bed and not too small, not too big. And that happens because he makes the person fit the bed by chopping off their feet or
it's very contrived.
So it can be that with correspondences, and not just planetary ones, but with correspondences, that people become, they sort of like really contrive and squeeze the things so that they fit, even though they don't quite anyway. So I think it's something that it's an interesting thing to follow through. And the doctrine of signatures, where things look like the part of the body that they help to heal, I think that has something in it, and that's something that's really fascinating. And I think that's to do with like the geometry of molecules or something, if I was trying to be rational about it. But on
all
a magical
the mushrooms
level,
will fix my cock. All of them.
Look, all I'm gonna say is that if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem's gonna start to look like a nail.
It's true.
That's a pretty interesting, like, thing. What I would say as far as like, planetary hours and correspondences and stuff like that, I tend to, because I work with a lot of kind of like planetary stuff as it is, but I've always kind of viewed it from a psychological perspective of, by doing these things, it enhances my ego's belief that I'm doing something significant.
Yep. So on like it's the second hour after sunrise on a Tuesday, therefore.
Yeah, and it also kind of like, it forces me to like organize and plan the things I want to do, which is something that just historically I've been bad about. I've always been like an improv, like, fuck it, let's just do it. Like, which can like has its time and place, but like, you know, I've had this, you know, desire to increase my ability to plan things, and this has helped with that. That being said, the thing that you had said earlier about like if you get to a point where you are giving your power to this substance, it's the same thing with like if you adhere so strictly to planetary hours that you are no longer the magician. Like you are giving your power to Mars in fucking Gatorade or whatever the fuck. Like, are you now, is it your will now, or are you just like subservient to some like weird esoteric ideology?
And there's always a dance going on there, isn't there, in a sort of like BDSM kind of way. It's like who's in charge, and it's just like you play with the sort of the fringes of those different things. But the thing about the planetary hours is that you're not just going, okay, on Friday I'll do this. You're doing, on Friday I will do this because it will align with all the planets and the stars and the heavens, and it will make it the right time to do it. It's destiny. And that makes it much more attractive to you for that then to happen on a Friday rather than just like, oh, I'll just do it on Friday.
Yeah.
It's much more exciting and dramatic, and you're really keying into the part of you that enjoys that part of
you're really
work.
getting into the ceremony and theatrics.
And it also, and for me personally, it enhances that belief of like, this is going to work because X, Y, and Z, not that they are happening, but because I have observed, planned, and acted accordingly to like be able to take maximum advantage of this, for all intents and purposes, coincidence, right?
Yep.
Like I have done my research basically to be able to do this thing, and therefore I will be attacking whatever, you know, problem I'm trying to solve with a much bigger arsenal, I guess.
Okay, and then the last question we have, which in the bio that you had sent us for us to post on all of our social media, whatever, you had mentioned that you have a degree in ecology. One of our questions was, are there any particular trees or plants that you find most helpful when contacting the fairy realms?
Yes, this is a lovely question. So the answer is, of course, that there are. But in a lot of ways, for me, mushrooms are the things, because it's the psychedelic that comes from the land that I live in. So if I'm trying to contact the fairies where I live, then I'm going to use the psychedelics from where I live. But beyond that, also, there are other things. So there are different sort of iconic trees and plants and fungi. I'm using sort of the term more sort of in a poetic-y sense there rather than strict biology.
Right.
So there are things in the living environment which I would associate with the presence of fairies. So a particularly old oak tree, for example, or the presence of certain types of flower plants that you see growing on the forest floor. Some of those for me signify, that means that there's this type of thing in the location. And that keys in very strongly with the South American tradition of doing dietas, where you have a very bland diet and then you work with a plant that's a medicine plant, but it's a medicine plant not because it's psychoactive, but because of the power that the plant has. And that power is very much a spiritual, magical power. And the idea is that you have just a very bland diet of just sort of rice, just enough to keep you sort of alive and stuff, just for like a week or two, water. So you have a very simple diet. And then you go to the forest and you might see the plant that you're wanting to have this sort of dieta with, and you might even start off by meditating in your hut for a while, and you have a leaf that you're given from the plant that you hold, and you come into contact with it that way, and then you gradually become like closer, and you sit with your back to the plant, but you know it's there, and then you turn around and you look at the plant, and you gradually get closer to the plant, and then you sit with the plant for maybe a day, and then you gradually sort of, you might ingest some of its nut or flower or something like that, so that it becomes part of your physical being. And that kind of relationship with different power plants, which is a practice that I know a lot of people that have done that in South America, and that seems quite powerful. And I think that doing that sort of practice with trees and plants in our own environment, ones that are culturally significant, that's something that I've not done yet, but it's on my things that I must do. And it's really good actually doing this podcast and saying that, because it's reminded me that that's an intention that I should have. And it's something that I think that we could learn from, because we have all these sort of cultural stories and tropes about certain plants, flowers, fungi, etc. And that's not to do with the effect that they have on you in a biochemical eating it kind of way, but they're the effects that the shape of it has, that the way that it's turned up in cultural iconography those influences on ourselves and the memories that we might have of us as we sort of pass through life, different encounters that we've had with the spirits of these plants. So those kind of plants and trees are the things that I find helpful when contacting the fairy realms, where you see beech trees which have those amazing trunks and branches which are all like very smooth, like elephant limbs, and as they come down to the ground, if they're growing on a sort of either an old stone wall or some kind of cliff edge, and the roots snake down and they look completely alive, and that's incredibly, for me, evocative of fairy type realms. So that kind of thing would be what I would point towards as being most helpful, rather than a psychoactive plant.
So you mentioned this kind of ritual with plants, and somewhat tangentially going back to the concept of chemognosis. Do you believe, from your experience, that this might have been a possible way that the people in South America, as you had mentioned, had helped start create ayahuasca, which from nowhere they realized, okay, this plant has DMT in it, and in order for it to become orally active, I need to eat this other plant that acts as an MAOI inhibitor.
Yes, that's a really mysterious thing, isn't it? Because there's so many different plants out there. I mean, an MAOI inhibitor does do stuff to you when you take it on its own. So it might just be that they realized that there were these two things and put them together that were individually that did do something. The evidence of sort of like exactly how long ayahuasca has been used for keeps changing every time I look at the latest research. There's some from a couple of years ago which shows that it might actually be not that old that people have been using this stuff, and certainly not on a widespread basis. So it's very hard because there just are no written records that people can refer back to.
Right.
So the actual evidence just isn't there for or against when it might have appeared. But I know someone from Romania, and she said that her grandmother can remember that there was a thing, there was a ritual that you would do if someone was ill, and you would do a ritual. This is what the grandmother was saying to my friend. She was saying that she could remember being, as a young person, that a ritual would be done if someone was ill, presumably with some sort of Christian sort of dressing around it. But you do the ritual to find which herb or plant would be the thing that would heal this particular illness. And then the person that had done the ritual would go out in the morning and they would head into the wood, and they would go into the forest, and they would go around and they would find the plant that they thought was the thing that would cure this thing, and they'd come back with it to the village, and then they would use it, and that would be how they would find new medicines. And sometimes they would find a plant and it would be something that no one had noticed before or no one had seen before, and it would be like it was a brand new plant that had been conjured into existence. But once it had been found and brought back to the village, people would see it everywhere, and it would be a really common thing.
Interesting.
And that's something that I've heard of from, so that was from someone who's from Romania, and I know someone from South America, and a lot of one of their practices was also an indigenous person from South America, and exactly the same process was used following an ayahuasca ceremony, and they would call on the spirits to guide them, and they would go into the jungle and find the thing and come back with it, pretty much exactly the same thing. And it's like, no, it's just everywhere now, because we just hadn't.
Right. It's like
the psychological reading of that would be that we hadn't noticed it before, but the magical reading of that is that we've called this into existence, or the spirits have given this to us to use.
Right, and that kind of goes along with anthropologically. They had asked these tribes that had used ayahuasca, and they're like, "Where did you learn this?" And the plants told us.
Yep.
So yeah, that's I find that very interesting. That kind of jives very well with the ritual that you had kind of described of, learning to know the plant at a very intimate level.
Yeah, there's some very interesting writing being done by it, which you can find online. There's one particular article which I really like, which I'll try and find the link for so you can share it with the listeners. So,
well, thank you. And at that, like those were all of the questions that we'd had from our listeners. So, unless you had anything else, Dreadnought, that you would like to ask Nikki.
I guess the thing that I kind of always like to ask in these interview situations is, if there is one takeaway or one thing that you would say to somebody that is looking to, begin researching or begin their kind of research or experimentation with Chemognosis, what would be like the thing you would tell people that are showing an interest?
Give us your hot take.
Enjoy it. That would be the shorthand thing that I would say. I would say enjoy it. Make sure you've done all the sort of planning thing. Don't get too hung up about, it might go wrong, because most of these substances are incredibly safe and not toxic. At the doses that you are intending to take them, as long as you're not like being like stupid about it, it's not going to do anything particularly terrible to you at all. So just enjoy it. You're along for the ride. You've committed to this thing. Go with it. Make sure you're in a safe place. You're not going to be disturbed by people that you don't want to be disturbed by.
Don't call the fucking pizza man, Tony.
No, don't do that. No, there's no need. You can wait till tomorrow for the pizza. And also, it will stop. Yeah, remember that. It will stop. It won't carry on forever. It's a finite thing. You're only in it for a few hours. It's not that long. Really, even though if you're in it, it can feel like it goes on for a while, which can be great if you're having a good time. So, that's all fantastic. But whatever is going on in it, it's going to stop, and you are going to be all right again afterwards. It's going to be fine.
Yeah. One of the things that I dealt with, a lot, especially when I'd first started out, was getting caught in like thought loops especially with mushrooms, just getting caught in these loops of logic where I'm constantly like going over the same territory. And at that point, it feels like you're going to be there forever.
Yeah. I alluded to that earlier on. It's just like, just get up and move. Just change your physical position. If you find yourself stuck, then take that sort of like as above, so below thing, change the position of your body, go somewhere else, like look in a different direction, find something different to put on the music, or just change something, and then you won't be stuck in it anymore. But don't try and just do it mentally. That's just silly. You're not using yourself to your ability then. You are an environment changing creature, especially as a magician. You are the person that makes the world. That's the whole point of this, is that you're the center of the universe. You have control over that. So if your head is stuck in a particular thought loop, then change something else in the world around you, and then that'll change your thought loop, and you can go into something much nicer.
Absolutely. I want to thank you so much for taking the time and coming to talk to us about this. I think it's something that is kind of not that it hasn't always been on the like kind of periphery of esoteric thought, but like in general, given that like esoteric thought is kind of seeing a revival, I think that there's a large interest in like Chemognosis and stuff like that is starting to come up again.
And I think it's very important that, people who are getting involved into Chemognosis know what they're getting into.
Yes, absolutely. But I think, part of the reason, a big reason of why this episode is important to me is that, like, I want people to know that this isn't like it's not a bunch of weird fucking like Charles Manson murder cult people running around like trying to fight like all of the crazy shit you heard from the 70s that like your boomer parents told you. Like there's validity to it, and it's something that should be viewed as valid with obvious caveats as anything, right? But like it's something that in my mind should absolutely be normalized.
Something that's important for people that have this sort of like stereotype view of psychedelics as being all like seeing everything in color and It's like, that's not quite like that. It's more like the person who's in charge of the CGI of your world has just become really good at it. So all of the edges are extra clear and everything is like the colors really popping, and that's the sort of thing that it has. So it makes everything hyper realistic in some ways rather than anything else.
With that statement, you bring up a question to me. How do you feel about Terence McKenna's stoned ape theory?
I vacillate between going, it's a load of nonsense and it might have something in it, but mostly I think that the timing of the way that things happened is not quite conducive to his particular idea, which is that the people had herds of cattle or followed herds of cattle around, and then the mushrooms grew on the dung of the cattle, and then they took them and then they became. So I don't think that the timing quite works out, but it might be that there's some kind of correlation between engaging with whatever plant materials it might be. There are lots of plants that contain DMT, like thousands
Right.
of them. And there's one particular species in Africa which actually also contains an MAOI. So if you ate it, it would be like eating an ayahuasca plant.
Well, I think there's with
cool.
what you had said with the like hyper focus of like edges and everything, there to some degree with the stoned ape theory, an ape who had eaten this plant now has a hyper like sense of their surroundings and is more easily able to, you know, differentiate between certain things in their surroundings.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because for me, psychedelics like make that distinction between self and the world disappear. So while I can see things really clearly, and it's sort of like almost like a cartoon kind of outline appears around things stand out really clearly. And that changes for different people, and I think it changes over your lifetime as well, because the receptors that you have in your brain that the classic psychedelics tap into, the 5-HTA receptors, they change where they are over time.
Right.
So it might affect your vision or your hearing or some other aspect of your memory or whatever, and that fluctuates as time goes on over your life, and it varies from individual to individual. So you can have a sort of tendency that it will be like that, but you can't ever predict exactly what kind of effect the things will have. Sorry, I was going off at a bit of a tangent there.
No, that's fine. Like I was curious in what your thoughts in regarding to that were.
So regarding the stoned ape theory thing, I think that there may be something in that, but it's because I was reading about this a while ago. So not the stoned ape theory, but the way that you construct this idea of self and other, and the way that you can sort of that you conceptualize of other people having a belief in the world that's like your own one. It's kind of like a culturally transmitted thing that happens, and all it took was like some people that were doing this for it to happen, and then it sort of spread. But it's something you have to learn as a child, otherwise you can never quite get into it. You don't have that theory of mind thing going on. So children did this, whatever it is that's made us be able to talk in a very reflective way about art and things. I'm not explaining this well at all.
No, it makes sense to me, like having studied linguistics, how basically like language comes from children, like absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, totally.
So
the fact that we have a childhood is the thing that's made our species what it is. That's why we're so bizarre compared to other things. That's the defining feature of humans. And that playing. And in some ways, psychedelics then enhance that, because they do take you into that very child sort of state. I was reading a thing earlier on today. Someone had put a picture up on the internet of Robert Anton Wilson, and it was a quote from him saying how when he was very young, he'd asked a friend of his who was a jazz musician, who was a real stoner. He'd said, you know, what's it like being stoned? And the jazz musician had explained it in the following way. He'd said, take a quarter out of your pocket and look at it. Yeah. When you're a child and you see that quarter for the first time, then you've never seen it before, and it's like really fascinating, and you look at it really carefully. And being stoned, really stoned, is like activating that kind of awareness again. So you become like, oh, what's the writing on this say? And you look at things in that kind of state. And that's a really good description of a lot of the psychedelic state, where you're seeing things as if for the first time. They're sort of like, they have a lot of the usual baggage that you bring with them is sort of a remove. It's not that it's not accessible, but it's slightly further away. So you're much more seeing what you're really seeing rather than what you think you're seeing.
Okay.
If you see what I mean. So
I get it.
When you're looking at a chest of drawers, which is what I can see in front of me at the moment, I can see a chest of drawers. But if I was tripping, I would be looking at the pieces of wood that it's made out of, and I would be looking at the lines that are created by the carving of it, and I'd be looking at the handle and wondering what that's made out of, and who thought of this idea of making a chest of drawers. And I would be seeing those things rather than just a chest of drawers.
Right. It's taking the nuance of things rather than just at face value.
Yeah. And that applies to the more abstract parts of one's self and life and the world around you as well. So when I kind of like, you know, when apprentices are sent to get like striped paint or a left-handed screwdriver, that kind of thing. Yeah. So when someone is tripping, not to because you don't want to be playing horrible tricks on people, but it's quite nice to say to people that, oh yeah, I'm feeling all right, this is quite handleable. You go, oh, can you go make a cup of tea then? And they come back like an hour later having like wrestled with the tap and how it turns on, and just like all of the the massive processes that lead into clean water coming out of a pipe in the house that they're in. Just like what?
Holy shit, there's a river in my house.
Yeah. And also just using a machine to make the water hot, which in America might be some kind of strange sort of stove with a
no, we just use fire and pots. That's all primitively.
We don't have here we have a kettle. We had a thing. Yeah, we don't have electric kettles. In and you just I know. Yeah, it's just it blew my mind weird. The first time I saw. Like, what do you do? Why are you using a saucepan to heat up water? What's going on?
Yeah, we have teapots, but we still heat those up with fire because we're fucking animals.
You're just off the wagon train. You can't help it. It's just how the state of mind that you're
you gotta get. You have to get peak 1950s nuclear family with it and heat your water up with a microwave.
God, no.
But anyway, even over here, where you have the luxury of just putting water into a kettle, you press the switch and it boils, and then it's ready. That can still take like a good half an hour to achieve when you're tripping, because you just get completely lost, and the kettle will boil, and then before they've actually managed to pick it up and pour it onto the tea bag, they get lost in something else that they're looking at, and then they have to come. Oh, it's not hot enough. I have to do it again, and they repeat and repeat. So the process of making a cup of tea takes at least an hour at that point.
Boiling water is not hot enough.
It shows people the way that an ordinary thing that you do all the time without thinking about it, if you think about it, it's got loads of different teachings in it and loads of lessons. So it's that object concentration, but writ very, very large in big neon shouty letters going, the world's really complicated.
just to sit there and think about what goes into like flipping a switch and then a light turns on, and you're like, what fucking sorcery is this?
Yeah. And what are the implications of doing this? Where is the electric coming from? Is it like wind generated, or is it from a nuclear power plant? Oh my God, what am I doing?
Oh my God, I need to turn this light off because it involves child slavery.
Like,
exactly. Yeah.
If I keep this light on, I'm just increasing my carbon footprint. I'm killing the planet. Hold on, let me just.
Yep. But you got to be. That's where you have to like go. Whoa, just be a bit sort of like, what's achievable in the world, even if it's not perfect. Like, try and get your electric supply in your own house from those things, but don't get so hung up on it that you end up just like a gibbering wreck in the corner, because that'll do no one no good.
Yeah, but I think that, like, to that end, it's important to kind of have that experience of just getting lost in that rabbit hole, because, like,
oh God, yeah.
Once you see that is what's going to happen, and I would say in the overwhelming majority of cases, right? That's the worst thing that's going to happen, is you're going to get caught in a weird logic loop. You're going to fall down a rabbit hole, and you're going to be sitting there just thinking about like the weirdest, most like, why is it that if I turn the screw this way, it tightens, but if I turn this, it's the same turning. Turning is turning. It doesn't really matter which way I should turn, but it does. Like, you get lost in that. Like, that's the worst thing that's going to happen. It's going to take away a lot of that like trepidation that people feel of like, I'm going to think I'm a glass of orange juice forever. Like,
no. That's not going to happen.
No, it will never happen. That's not how drugs work.
All right. Well, again, I want to thank you so much for coming on and talking to us for a while, and with your knowledge and being able to kind of open this door for a lot of people. I think that, you know, it's such a big scary thing, especially for people that haven't, you know, experimented with any kind of, you know, psychedelic before. Or, you know, chemognosis in general. I think a lot of people tend to be drawn towards psychedelics and thinking that, like, psychedelics are, like, the be-all, end-all. I think they're certainly, like, an important thing. They're not the only method of experimentation with chemognosis. But I think at all, it has to start with being able to have an intelligent conversation about it. And I want to thank you for coming on and facilitating that.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure and a delight. And yeah, if you subscribe to the Psychedelic Press Quarterly Journal, plug, there's lots of good stuff in there.
Anything that you've got, places where people can read stuff that you've written, or, you know, reach out with questions, anything like that?
Yep. So I'm the editor of a journal which comes out 4 times a year, and it's about sort of 20,000 words from like history, culture, very good trip reports, and bit of poetry, bit of creative writing. And I write the editorial, which I try and make a bit interesting and enlightening as well. And you can buy those from the Psychedelic Press site. Also books by the Psychedelic Press. There's a few there which your listeners might find interesting. There's a book about microdosing, science of microdosing, which is it's quite a sort of like hardcore sort of sciencey kind of thing, but it's very readable, and it's about the early experiments with LSD, which used very, very small amounts of it, which equate to what people are now using for microdosing. And it's looking at those old experiments and then in the light of, so what was that? And a lot of the research was in not written down in English. So Torsten Passy has taken those things and made them available for the general reader. So that's quite an interesting sort of geeky background to microdosing, which is quite interesting, which we publish. But most of the stuff we do is to do with history and culture. We see what else. Oh, there's the Breaking Convention, which is the conference that was mentioned in my biography thing. So every other year, usually, we hold a conference, which is, the last one we had was 1,500 people, and it's over 3 days. And so the more than 200 speakers are all invited to submit a piece of writing for a book which gets published. And I had the honor of being the editor for the last one of those, which is called Psychodelicacies, and it's by a publisher called Strange Attractor. And there's some really lovely pieces of writing in there from all sorts of different perspectives, from sort of philosophy and then also medical research type stuff and neurological types, looking at it, and also cultural things to do with anthropological things and artistic stuff, performance things, modern shamanism type stuff. So it's huge sort of good sort of broad range of different subjects there, and also looking at things like the Eleusinian mysteries, I think, is mentioned in there. So that's a really good book. I would totally recommend having a look at that if people are interested in the area of psychedelics and all of the incredibly varied ways that people across the planet and in different time frames have used those. The Breaking Convention YouTube channel has recordings of pretty much every lecture from many of our things. So there's literally hundreds and hundreds of lectures, and that's a really good place to go to because that's free and instant. So you can just watch those, and those are 20 minutes long each. So you can have a look at those and search by subject to see what different things different people have said about stuff, and that's a really nice place to go to. And it's just a general sort of big smorgasbord that you can have a look at. Some of it's by people that are very good speakers. Some of it is by people who are less good. Some of it is very accurate science. Some of it not quite so. But we try and maintain a certain amount of standard. So, you've got Dennis McKenna is a regular attendee and has often given talks there. And yeah, that's got some quite good stuff on the Breaking Convention YouTube channel. I would heartily recommend that. And I also recently was started to put the Psychedelic Press with did talks that we toured around the country, and we've got some video of one of the events that we did in London, which have just started to go online. So there's a couple of very good talks there. There's a really good talk about mescaline. There's a very good researcher called Mike J, who often curates different exhibitions and shows to do with various psychological things, including various drugs. He did a very good show on opium and another one which was about madness. He's written a book recently about mescaline, the history of mescaline, which is incredibly fascinating, and it goes through all the Native American church stuff as well as lots of other aspects of this particular substance, and I heartily recommend that. But if you haven't got access to the book, then watch his talk, which is on the Psychedelic Press YouTube channel. It's a very good film, very good little hour-long talk, very nice. There are things out there.
No, I'm excited. Like I've been listening to a lot of lectures on YouTube, so now I've got my next several months planned out. But yeah, thanks again for joining us. We greatly appreciate you having taken the time to talk with us about chemognosis and chemical use in magic.
It's been an honor. Thank you very much. And I'm going to excitingly go downstairs and have a cup of herbal tea next. That's my next substance I'm going to put into my body. Woo! I know how to live.
Try not to live too much. Leave some of it for the rest of us.
It's a Friday night.
Thanks again. This has been Nikki Weird with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jeremood and Dreadnought. It's been a pleasure.
The Faithblind Council would like to give a big shout out to the Folk Magic Society. Based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, this group explores how people do magic around the world, including spells, divination, dolls, talismans, astrology, and more. Normally meeting at Mage's Books at 1848 Central Avenue on the second Saturday each month, they've recently expanded their presence by hosting online discussions. The host, Dave, is an archaeologist who shares a wealth of knowledge on the history of magic and spiritual practices. To learn more and join in an upcoming event, look for the Folk Magic Society on Facebook.
Hey there, Luxa here, host of Lux Occult, a podcast where we gleefully taunt the mundane, butcher the Latin and most other languages, and also discuss a variety of occult topics. Exploring the intersection of science, magic, art, and philosophy through the lens of chaos, it's occultism for everyone. Lux Occult features interviews with badass authors, artists, and magicians of all walks and experience levels, as well as audiomantic nonsense, cut-up poetry, bibliomancy breaks, and so much more. Don't miss my conversation with Frater Yara about the magic of language, or the episode with the whole Faithblind Council crew featuring a meditation for the Green Mushroom Project, which is a large-scale group working focused on building connection and regaining ground that you can be a part of. You can hear Lux Occult on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. So tune in and join us for the ride.
All right. Well, that was the interview with Nikki, and it was amazing. And I hope you all learned from it as much as we learned in partaking in the interview. But one thing that I would also like to mention, Nikki had wanted me to bring up. Before the interview, I had said that she had written the book, the Book of Baphomet with Julian Vane. Julian Vane has actually written another book called Getting Higher, the Manual of Psychedelic Ceremony, which she believes would do a lot of our listeners service in reading. So having read the Book of Baphomet, I would highly suggest this book because it's probably, on par with the brilliance that was the Book of Baphomet.
Okay, very cool. Hell yeah.
So I guess let's get into reviewing challenges from the last episode. Last episode we covered Tantra. So that I'm pretty sure was fucking involved as hell for you, Kilone. Yeah, you've got notes.
I'm sure you're hoping that I remember what those challenges are.
Looking forward to hearing about this.
Know what they were. So I'm gonna start with Dreadnoughts because I felt like it was more straightforward. That he had asked me to basically document my consciousness changing, doing something like creative, like focused, like getting into flow. Through my own experience, I dabble in a wide array of artistic endeavors, but I'm a perfectionist at heart. Like, I like to call myself a recovering perfectionist because I try to be less of a perfectionist. I try to realize it's not going to be perfect, so just go with it. Yeah, and Dreadnought says that all the time, and it's very true. It's very true. They tell you to never say what's your greatest weakness in a job interview to be perfectionism, but I tend to use it anyways and then explain why it's a actual problem and what I've done to overcome it. So just a little tip for y'all out there if you are a perfectionist and you know that's a problem. Anyway, so yeah, he asked me to work on do something artistic and kind of observe my consciousness. And, I did a variety of things because I do some artwork that what I would call almost a craft is very physical and is more perfection oriented. Like I do leather craft, and doing that sort of work does definitely focus me and changes my mindset to one that is focused and very Gnosis and flow-like. But I am very hung up on details when I do leather craft. I want every little punch that I'm doing, cut that I'm doing is, something I want it to be as perfect as possible because it's an actual consumable item. And I want it to be of high quality. I feel like the art that maybe best worked with this sort of practice was working on music, which is something that I enjoy and I love, but I personally can't claim to be great at it. I love to write songs, but I'm not a very strong musician in the sense of any particular instrument. And so, taking to that, I took that as a way to like, okay, let's get back into working with music because I've been a bit estranged from it lately. Haven't been practicing much. Haven't been writing many songs or just playing around, just fucking around with my ukulele. Yes, I have a ukulele. I'm one of those people.
You're a ukulele person.
I'm a ukulele person. Got it right here.
It's okay. You don't have to be ashamed.
No, it's okay. We're both ukulele people, and you and I have gotten into arguments about what the tuning should be. So,
what I love about ukulele is that really I think anybody can learn this instrument, and I feel like music should be accessible. It's like, and it's cool. Like, okay, you can't play a violin, you can't play a flute, you can't play something that's very complicated and difficult and expensive, but ukulele can really, it's like something where you can just play a few chords and build a song out of it. And it doesn't have to be, complicated. It's like there's nothing wrong with the 4-chord song, as much as we like to make fun of it, especially.
no, that's the entire punk genre.
Or even 2 chords.
No,
it's like it's fine. You can do that. So I had, like been spending more time with my uke just fucking around with chords and making shit up. And so I feel like one of the songs I kind of came up with, and it's not complete. I mostly just have the chorus. I've been working a little on verses, but who knows if I'll ever actually complete the damn thing. It's just something I'm fucking around with. But like one of the songs I came up with where the chorus is, I don't care if I'm making music or if I'm just making noise. Like an idea of like that the act of creation itself is very therapeutic, is very cathartic, and it's also like it's non-judgmental. It's both good and bad. It's something that is own purpose. That's one thing I love about creating music over doing things like leathercraft or other physical things, is that it's not really a consumable product. It's you can just do it in the moment. And I feel like that kind of fits the mentality of Tantra as we were discussing it last time, that you can do something badly and it doesn't, like, it's not bad, it's just something that it's a process that you're going through.
Yeah, and this like distinction of like music versus noise, like in that interplay, like there's something very interesting there, which I think definitely touches on what you're talking about.
Yeah. So that's like one that's my response to Dreadnought's thing. So coming to Yara's, where okay, you asked me to list evil things and then write like a positive to it. Okay, I never follow anything according to the exact rules, so bear with me. So if this one, like I guess like you had mentioned a few resources and stuff, and I really wanted to read more about Tantra, particularly the resources you had given, but I didn't get around to it. I have a very full life, and I didn't get around to it. And but my sense, like when I was attempting to do this and working on it multiple times, I just felt like the interpretation of, like, I think you gave certain examples, and I can't say the exact ones, so I'll give ones that I feel like are similar representations, but like, like something bad happens, so like they lose their job, but ultimately like the good is that they end up getting a job they like better or something like that. And I don't know, I felt like that's not really like the I don't know, like I feel like I have, okay, this is probably going to come off all really weird, but my view of this duality, was good or evil is more along the lines of understanding that both good and evil happen. And it's not necessary that we have to throw out our morals and be like, hey, this thing is, look at something and be like, that is evil and we should stop it. Or that's bad and we should try to help it or stop it. You know, it's more recognizing that there's like a flow of ups and downs of evil and good. And like trying to look at something like really horrific, like, you know, people starving somewhere because of lack of resources, and be like, well, what's the good of that? And by the definition of this particular challenge, I would have assumed the answer would be something like, oh, well, they're not suffering anymore. But I think my perception of like these understanding that good and evil, that it's not something that we should fight against people suffering in any way, or that there's necessarily anything good coming out of suffering, but that it's an experience that us as living beings within our material world has. And that it's just our lot in life to experience these things, whether they're suffering or they're good. And I just couldn't really bring myself to make like this long list of like evil things and then say like there's something just good coming out of it. You know, I think we're kind of meant as beings to experience these things. And unfortunately, some of us have more suffering than we have good. And ultimately, we should want to reduce that suffering. But that the duality of being like I thought of the most evil thing I could, like the Holocaust. Okay, and fundamentally, there is no good that came out of that, as far as I am concerned. All I can say is that like it is a historical event that happened. You know, it's something that we can't really look back and deeply judge as something as like, well, we could have changed that, or what could have happened, or there could have been an alternate history. It's just something that us as humanity created. And yeah, obviously I struggled a lot with this particular challenge, and that I just don't view good and evil quite as those sort of like juxtaposing concepts as much as something that both exists and that we have to accept to a certain degree in order to accept reality, and that we have to assume that we have to experience, because that's just our place in the universe to do it.
Yeah, dude, I think that's really fucking well said.
Hey, you got the point. Like you understood the fucking non-dualistic fucking Shiva Shakti tantrism. Like it's all it is experience witnessing creation.
And I didn't even read a book to know that. I still want to read that book.
Well, no, that's a fucking great point, though. Like, I mean, you can read all the shit that you want in books, but like, until you actually do these practices, you're not going to understand it in the same way as just like looking at it from a kind of like a philosophical point of view.
Which is what we've been teaching through our whole fucking podcast, is actually do the fucking work. Don't just sit there in an armchair and...
Sure. So my experience with this has been like a little bit less direct, but like I don't like olives. They're gross.
You are wrong, but I forgive you.
But for
which ones?
Well,
I don't...
well, any of them. Like at first, any of them.
I don't like green olives. Black olives are the tits, and it's for a really weird reason too. Because like with black olives, the more you chew on them, the more they kind of taste like plastic. And so I really like that for some reason. I don't know. I'm fucked in the head.
Don't get back. I mean... Olives are good. You're all wrong. Put them like when I was in college, I would order a pizza that no one else would want to eat, so I could have the whole thing. I put olives and mushrooms on it. Guaranteed, no one else would want it.
I would want that pizza.
Okay. So, but whatever. Like, I mean, just the idea of like, I don't really like this food, but like, I know that, well, first of all, I know it's good for you. Like, objectively, it is good for you to eat these things. So, like, I experimented with the idea of just eating them and like experiencing that
let me just say that taking vitamins is good for you too, but you shouldn't chew on them because they taste like shit.
But
So
fish
there's
oil,
a counterpoint
God.
to that.
of course, this was like for a specific purpose, right? Like after I listened to your guys' Tantra episode, I was like, I'm going to do this with olives because they're gross, but they're also beneficial.
Well, as someone who, like, I have a digestive illness, and I have had to learn to just eat things that previously I disliked. And I have learned to eat, like, weird protein and vegetable shakes and stuff just so I could live through certain periods of my life. And I have a high tolerance for incredibly weird taste now. But I still don't forgive cucumber.
Mhm.
They're off the table. I have tried so many times to like cucumber. I'm like, oh, I can't get over it. Can't get over it.
No, I totally understand that because I hate celery. I hate celery for the same reason. It's this crunchy, weird. It's like crunchy water that tastes like grass clippings.
Yeah, I mean, again, like no matter what it is, though, like coming from this perspective of like, here's this thing that I have this experience of, can I sit with that experience of it and understand it in like a deeper way that will change my perspective, not just of that experience with that thing, but of every fucking thing else, right? Like, is that sort of the idea?
Well, I think that's one way to describe it. I think it's something that is beyond duality. Of course, like, I think I might have a very personal definition. Duality is different from other people. I like to set aside duality is different from dichotomy. Dichotomy is two things are very much, the idea that, like, up and down are opposites. End of the story. That's it. But duality is more like two things that are the same but are experienced differently.
Sure.
So kind of more like on a spectrum.
And I don't think this is I don't think that's a definition anybody else uses, but I like the word. I really like duality as a concept, male and female. They're the same but experienced differently. Black and white. Good and evil. I've always had a very, very distinct dislike of dichotomies as someone who both loved like math and the sciences and also like literature and the arts. This idea you had to choose between one or the other.
That's dumb. Like, that's not how things actually work. No, I totally agree.
Yeah, where I see how much they work together, how much understanding both of them like really expands one's experience and one's understanding of the world. So that's I use those two words in that way, understanding the difference, dichotomy versus duality.
No, that makes sense to me. The concept of dichotomy being like diametrically opposed
Exactly.
ideas, whereas how you're using duality is more two ideas that exist on a spectrum.
Gosh, y'all, that I don't know. Is there really a difference here? I'm conflicted if there's actually a difference or not. But we can come back to this.
Okay, so no, I was thinking more like chemically. You have like oil and water; they are completely non-miscible. However, and so with them being completely non-miscible, and you can't mix them at all, those would be like a dichotomy. They exist as two separate things. They cannot
Without a
be
duality,
mixed under any
because they're still fluid. Okay.
right. Whereas with a duality, like if you start incorporating different other chemicals within inside of like oil and water, you can have different levels of miscibility. So you can still have like like I sent you the fucking the hot dog water hydrolat.
Sure. Oh yeah. Sure.
Yeah, so you still have some essential oil of hot dog in that water, but it's water that just smells very strongly and painfully like hot dogs.
Okay, so I think I got it. Oil and water is a dichotomy where light and dark is a duality.
I guess I'm applying it more on abstract ideas. I think Yara makes it. He may have actually proved to me there is a dichotomy, water and oil. That's a dichotomy, and I'm applying it to more abstract concepts in which I don't think there's much dichotomy at all. Like, I barely believe there is such a thing as dichotomy with these abstract concepts, and that I just use those two words to kind of describe a difference in mentality towards what we often refer to simply in English as opposites. And duality is more about the interplay between those two things, and not just like a spectrum, because I still like references like a distinct difference between one end and the other, but just like as much as they aren't really that different. Like they just exist together. And I guess it's a more, maybe it's a Taoist sort of concept, which I don't understand as deeply as maybe I should, but like it might be coming from my earlier Taoist studies when I was very young. Just that these two things are not like they have different traits on the outside, but they really aren't different fundamentally in like a, I don't even know what word to use, like metaphysical, spiritual, like way. Like it's just, they're only different because we need to have differences in things in order to discuss them. Like we have to separate things in order to understand them in any way. That's just the nature of our material reality.
No, absolutely. Like things like light and dark or whatever are defined by the opposite. Whereas like with something like a dichotomy, like you can have things in common, but there's one distinctive factor that differentiates them. They don't define each other with their differences, like light and dark, like oil and water. They're both liquid, sort of, right? But there's distinct differences between them that you can draw a dichotomy between or from.
Well, you could even take it in like color theory and shit like that with, the hue of something. Like it still has elements of the other color in it, but it is predominantly this other color. Or like taking into like changing the contrast of an image. Like it still has this one aspect in it, but it is predominantly this other thing.
I think my perception's still a little different from your two's, but that's okay. I think if you've listened to the whole discussion, you will probably understand the difference between how I am discussing it and how you two are. And that's not a bad thing.
Okay. No, I think I agree, and I think we've fucking hammered this shit out, right? Like
With a fucking hydraulic press. Let us know how we're intrinsically wrong.
I'm sure that if you have thoughts, you can write into Faithline Council podcast and share them.
Come to the Discord.
Yeah,
let me
join
know.
the fucking Discord.
DM me, whatever.
Yeah, but the Discord is a fun place to hang out, so check that out for sure.
Yes, do it.
Okay, so we've talked about your cool experiences, Colin, with these challenges from last time. Like, should we move on to new challenges relating to Chemognosis?
Who's going first?
All right, so I'll go first. So with the recently, since you had mentioned the Discord server, Luxa, one of the things that had happened on there recently is I had one of the members that we have on there was asking about incorporating herbs and things into dreaming, because they had heard lots of things about, like, incorporating mugwort for more lucid dreams or whatever. And so they asked me if I had anything that I could steer them towards. And I actually have my own herbal blend of lots of different dream and soporific herbs that, when blended together and made a tea, have lots of different properties.
Okay, dope. So is this like something that they can like buy on Welcome to Paradise?
Not yet, because I haven't put it up there, but yeah, eventually I'll put it up there. But it's a blend of things that are meant to induce a kind of a what's the word, like a tranquilizing state So it's meant to like calm you fucking down. It's meant to like gear you towards going the fuck to sleep. And then when you do go the fuck to sleep, it not only allows for more vivid dreaming, but it allows for dream retention. So when you wake up the next morning, you remember more of these super vivid dreams. So I had given that to them, and they came back the next day and were like, no, this did a fucking phenomenal job, and I want more of it. And so what I'm going to do is, since you, Keelone, actually aren't that far from me, I will give you a packet of this and give it to you and offer that as a kind of chemognostic thing, because there are chemicals that are involved in it that will induce a particular state. And I want to know how these particular chemicals work for you.
I am excited to try this because I'm generally a lucid dreamer and a vivid dreamer, and I tend to retain my dreams. So I am very interested to see how much more of an effect this might have on me.
Yeah, I would be interested in trying this too. If you have extra, you should send some my way, and I will report back.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so during the interview, Dreadnought brought up a good point about like, like dopamine and exercise and stuff. And Nikki had talked a lot about like drumming and dance and like, this idea of like making your own tools, recording your own like drumming and then listening back to it. I thought there could be like a nice intersection here. Like I know, Keelan, like that you're into dance and stuff. So like I thought that maybe there could be something here where, exploring these like altered states that can be brought about by something like dance, something that's accessible to everybody that might not have, access to whatever interesting chemicals might be available to others. Everybody has access to doing these like practices of dancing or drumming or whatever, even if you're just drumming on the fucking table. So I was curious, to see if you might want to explore the kind of technicalities of like finding like where that interface like shifts, like that where that like altered state of consciousness like really kind of comes into play, like in a practice with dance, like and really kind of pinpointing that in a technical way.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. I actually do have a conga. I haven't used him forever.
Okay.
But yeah, I could play around with that and do dance. I think that's interesting because, so many of these chemicals we've talked about do play with like dopamine levels. And that's in many ways the way, excitatory gnosis works as well.
Yeah, and from my own experience, like, and I think Nikki might talk about this a little bit too during the interview, this kind of like maybe state dependent memory or whatever, like it's not just about the chemicals you've ingested, it's about like the actions that you're doing too. It's all involved. So like maybe there's something there with like, dancing in a certain way or whatever that allows you access to these established pathways that you've had before.
Okay. Got it. Written down.
Okay.
And I think another thing that might, like, I would give this to you as kind of like a side quest, I suppose. But I'm going to be doing the exact same thing. And
ooh, side quest. Yes, I'm a completionist.
Yes. So I'm going to offer this as kind of like a side quest, but I'm going to be doing the exact same thing. Because I intend on doing like a drastic paradigm shift soon. But I am going to, and offer you the same thing, is to look into plants, fungi, whatever, chemicals that exist naturally in your area, in your natural biome. So plants that grow in the particular place that you live, and I offer this to listeners as well, and see what plants you can find that have any sort of psychotropic or any physiological changing kind of properties, and see if you can incorporate that into your work.
Okay.
All right, so the divination that we had decided on was, I think it was called Drimomancy. Let me see if I can spell that.
No one can spell that. It's impossible. Don't even try.
Yeah, here it is. Drimamancy, Drimamancy, which is the ability to divine insights by the use of bodily fluids.
Okay. Very fun.
Yeah. So we're humans. We have bodily fluids. So in order for me to define or kind of do a divination on how I believe your quests are going to go, I am just going to spit on my desk. So. Oh, gross.
Live right here, people.
So
you can hear
let's
it.
see. That is, God damn it! I should get something to clean this. Okay, so I'm seeing. Yeah, like you just do it and then regret what you did and learn not to do it again.
That
how all
that
good
seems
magical
about
acts
right
start.
with Chemognosis. God damn it.
Yeah, you learn your lesson.
Instant
So
regret.
with me doing this, I'm seeing out of this spray that is on my desk, I'm seeing a large globule up at the top over here, as opposed to lots of smaller ones to the right. But I think that with this, that you're going to learn to get into states that you hadn't before. So particularly with the fact that I'll be giving you the dream thing, I think that from this you'll be discovering a kind of state or memory that you hadn't yet previously accessed, because this large globule is in a higher state than the rest of them. So yeah, that's what I'm getting from it. And the fact that from doing this dream herb thing, you'll find something new in a higher state. Yeah, that was gross.
I have another little postcard. I could spit in the middle of it and do like a Rorschach test thing with it. What do you think?
There you go.
1.5. Unfolding. Let's see if I can see. So I am seeing a great big smile and a clown nose.
Awesome.
Seems like fun, right? So it depends on how you feel about clowns. But yeah, I definitely see a smile.
How do you feel about clowns, Galone?
I'm kind of indifferent. I find them fascinating. I'm neither for or opposed clowns. I'm a big Sid Haig fan. Does that say anything?
Sure.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so what I'm seeing here is a sort of upward motion, a lot to be discovered, but also a lot to be shared.
Of course, I'll be sharing it. That's without saying. That's just your spit nation for that one. I'm just saying
yeah,
we could
exploring
have
new
chosen some other
territories.
bodily fluids instead. But yeah,
This is one of the
Be
grossest
nice.
divinations I've ever done, by the way. I'm into it.
Yeah. It could have gotten a lot weirder.
Actually, yeah, this was like the most benign place I thought this might go. So I'm pleased with it. Okay, so thank you so much for having me on your show. It could have gotten a lot worse.
Thank you for being here. We're really glad you were here.
Yeah, thanks for,
I am.
for everything.
Yara, are you glad?
Yeah. Yes. No, I am
Keeping us
resentful
on track
and I hate
and everything,
the fact
it's
that you
great.
are here. Ugh, so mad.
Okay, that kind of makes me even happier, to be honest.
We have to have an adult in the room, and you're it, I guess.
Yeah, that's very scary. We all miss Fred or Dad. Sorry, y'all. I tried to fill the shoes, but I don't think I did a great job.
You did a great job at filling
I'm sure Fred or Dad will be back soon.
You can be sore mom. Sore mom.
I'm just so happy to be. I'm honored to be like on the podcast that puts the frat back in fratter.
Hell
That's
yeah.
all.
You can't see it, but I'm totally dabbing right now.
Are we dabbing? Is that what we're doing? Okay.
We're all fucking dabbing right now.
We're all dabbing now. We're doing it.
All right. Well, fuck all of you. Thank you so much for having me.
Fuck you too.
Thank you for being here. And this has been the Faith Blind Council. And I am Seder Cologne.
Frater Yarmerud. Thank you.
Signing off.
Alexis Strata. Take care.
Later.
Be seeing ya.
This has been a production of the Faith Blind Council. Please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/faithblindcouncil. We would also like to thank our sponsors. You can support us by supporting them. You can also contact us on Twitter at FBC Podcast, the number 1, on Instagram at FBC Podcast, and via email at faithblindpod@gmail.com.